concern for the America that I thought I knew. I thought our country wanted different things than him, but by a free and fair election, this is what they want. Whereas before we can say we were the majority, this is not what the country wants, and we will stand against it. We don't have that mandate this time around. And at this point, fighting this administration is fighting a democratic election.
Honestly, my first reactions was, you know what, America? Pardon my French, but it. If that's how you feel about it, have it, America. You voted for this. Buckle up. It's going to get bad, and I'm going to say I told you so.
Would you consider marching again? Is there talk about marching?
Yeah, and it's not going over real well.
I know Women's March is planning a march on January 18th. They're saying it's the People's March. Well, you know what? The people, in my mind, the people voted for Trump.
When I watched Kamala Harris' concession speech, and people were saying like how inspiring it was, don't ever give up because she says that. I'm like, no, no. At a certain point, no, you have to give up. Like, I don't have the energy or any battery left in me to do anything other than to fight for myself.
And to answer your question for me personally, no. I don't know any organizer from the original Women's March that thinks marching right now is a good idea.
And why don't you think it's a good idea?
To me, it kind of feels like trying to recreate something that should never be recreated or should have never had to have been recreated.
There needs to be some time to reflect and regroup and really look at ourselves and say, what are we doing wrong? Like, where do we go from here?
And what do you plan on doing instead?
I mean, that's really hard. That is the question, right? Like, well, what do you do? I don't know. But the answer is probably not right before us. If we jump to the conclusion right away and say, okay, well, then we need to do X, Y, and Z, like, are we not doing a disservice to the lesson that we should learn from this? Like, maybe we need to be more thoughtful about it and examine how we may have played a role in it. So it's the time to reflect and regroup, but it's not the time to march. I don't think that marching will do any good. That's not the direction we should go in.
Session of the Board of Supervisors for November 19, 2024. Good. The board just held its regular afternoon session at 3 p.m. today, followed by a closed session. Item J. Item J, certification resolution. In the closed session just concluded, nothing was discussed except the matters which were identified in the motions to convene in closed session earlier. Only those matters lawfully permitted to be discussed under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act were discussed. Is there a motion to adopt the certification resolution?
Motion to adopt.
Is there a second?
Second.
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Radford?
Yes.
Mrs. Hooker?
Yes.
Mr. Mahoney?
Yes.
Mrs. Shepard?
Yes.
Mr. North?
Yes. Item K, second reading of ordinance and public hearing. Number 1, ordinance amending Article 3 district regulations and Article 4 use and design standards of the Roanoke County zoning ordinance in order to regulate tobacco, nicotine, and hemp product retail sales locations pursuant to Virginia Code Section 15.2-912.4. The chair recognizes Philip Thompson, Director of Planning. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Kind of go through the proposed ordinance amendments. As you all may recall, during the past legislative session, the General Assembly passed a bill that allows the county to prohibit the sale of tobacco and vaping products within 1,000 feet of a school or a daycare center. The county schools requested that the Board of Supervisors consider passing an ordinance regarding this issue. Back in June of this year, you all adopted a resolution requesting the Planning Commission to look at this issue and forward a recommendation back to you. So we reviewed the amendments with the Planning Commission at its August 6th meeting. We advertised amendments, sent letters to proposed or affected property owners. And we had the proposed amendment would limit the sale of tobacco products, vapor products, alternative nicotine products, and hemp products within 1,000 feet of any principal school building. That was what was really done, that dealt with retail sales. And while retail sales includes a lot of uses, we then realized there were other uses that potentially would sell these products. And the way our ordinance is written is retail sales covers a lot of things, except for if they're more specifically defined in our ordinance. And so convenience stores, fuel centers, and gas stations are separately defined, and therefore we wanted to add those back in. So we still went through with the public hearing on September 3rd. They opened the public hearing and took public testimony. Staff advertised the revised set of regulations. They postponed it to October 1st, and then we held a public hearing on October 1st before the Planning Commission. So section 15.2-912.4 deals with the regulation of tobacco, nicotine, and hemp products, and this gives the county the ability to limit the retail sales of vapor products, alternative nicotine products, tobacco products, and hemp products within 1,000 linear feet of a child daycare center or a private, public, or parochial school. Again, the ordinance does not affect the licensee holding a valid license under section 4.1-206.3 or any retail location that tobacco products, nicotine, vapor products, or any of the other products are being sold or continue to be sold before July 1st. So the amendments we went through is, if you don't understand our ordinance, when you have a use that's permitted, we have use and design standards, and the way we designate that there are use and design standards is that there is an asterisk that is shown for that particular use. So for C1, C2, and I1, we add that asterisk to that use for retail sales because now we are creating a new use and design standard. The use and design standard for convenience store, fuel center, gasoline station, and retail sales are all the same. And basically, our originally proposed one was the same. It's the retail sale of tobacco products, nicotine, vapor products, alternative nicotine products as defined in section 18.2-3711 or 371.2 of the Code of Virginia, or hemp products intended for smoking, of the defined as section 3.24112 of the Code of Virginia, shall be prohibited on properties located within 1,000 feet of a principal school building. With that, as part of the exercise, we went through from a staff level and mapped what that 1,000 feet would be for every school in the county. And so I think you've probably already seen these maps, but we'll go through them pretty quick. So what you'll see from a mapping standpoint on these is, number one, if it's AV or C1, which is the green or the pink, those still require a special use permit for all those uses. But those uses are by right in C2 and I1. We also mapped if there was an existing store that sold tobacco or vape products, and that's the little kind of blue circle. So for Back Creek Elementary School, there are several properties that are zoned AV, and there is a location that currently sells tobacco products within that 1,000 feet perimeter. There is no properties that would be affected by Bonsack Elementary, none by Cave Spring High School. Cave Spring Middle and Elementary have several properties along Brownton Avenue that would be impacted, both that are zoned C1 and C2. Faith Christian and Clearbrook Elementary, none for Faith Christian, but Clearbrook Elementary has obviously Walmart that sells tobacco products, but has those properties that are zoned C2 around it. Community School, the properties that are shown in are zone C1. Most of those properties are owned by Hollins University. Along the Peter Street corridor, you do have the potentially new CTE Center, a variety of private schools, as well as Burlington Elementary. And you can see the properties that are zoned C2 and C1 in that vicinity. Fort Luce Elementary, on the border with Salem, has a few properties that could be impacted. Glen Cove Elementary, the two that are shown are the Public Safety Center and the School Administration Center. I don't think there'll be any products sold there. Hope not. Glenver Middle, High, and Elementary, there's a couple of properties across their state that are zoned I1 that could be impacted. Green Valley Elementary has one property that is impacted, that's an AEP station or a substation. There's no properties around Hidden Valley High School, none on Hidden Valley Middle School, none around Masons Cove Elementary. Mount Pleasant, there is an existing convenience store along J Valley Road, but there's also several properties that are zoned AV. Again, retail sales would require a special use permit in that district. There are no properties that would be impacted by the buffer around Mountain View Elementary. North Cross does impact West Village and Promenade Park, and several properties at that intersection of Electric Road and Colonial Avenue. Northside Middle and High have some properties along Peters Creek and Third Lane Road that would be potentially impacted. Oak Grove Elementary has Oak Grove Plaza, also Metis Plaza as well. And you can see the existing BP station that sells products today. Penn Forest Elementary, again, you have the several properties. A lot of those are public facilities or industrial. In Benton, obviously there are no for Herman Horn or Cundiff, there are no properties impacted. And then Williamburg, Middle and High, there's a few properties along Stewartsville Road or Washington Avenue. As I mentioned, there was a public hearing on September 3rd. There was one citizen who spoke during the public hearing regarding his concerns on the proposed amendments impacting him locating a cigar, pipe, tobacco store in West Village Shopping Center near Norcross. Again, the Planning Commission continued the public hearing until October 1st. At the October 1st continued public hearing, there were 6 people representing the school system that spoke during the public hearing in support of the proposed amendments. There was additional letters of support, which I believe are in your packet, were also submitted for the public record. The Planning Commission discussed the benefits and challenges with the proposed amendments, and the Planning Commission recommends approval of the zoning ordinance amendments to apply only to Roanoke County high schools and middle schools, and that the prohibition on the retail sales of tobacco products be removed from the ordinance. And so the revised use and design standard for that's being proposed as that recommendation for convenience store, fuel center, gas station, retail sales is that retail sale of nicotine vapor products, alternative nicotine products, or hemp products intended for smoking shall be prohibited on properties located within 1,000 feet of a principal school building of any Roanoke County public high or middle school. This shall not affect a licensee holding a valid license under state code section, and any retail sale location of nicotine, vapor products, alternative nicotine products, or hemp products intended for smoking operating before November 20th, 2024. So with that, I will take any questions you may have.
Any questions, board, for Philip Thompson? Mr. Radford?
Yeah, I have a question. Okay, I read the ordinance. The last slide you had up, if you can back up to that. Okay, so item 1, a licensee holding a valid license under the Code of Virginia to any retail location of nicotine vapor
Any
products.
current-
So the question is, these, the tenants, what if they roll over in 10 years and they come back and they apply for a license, you know, to have a convenience store, and they want to carry the nicotine products over there in the Oak Grove area, in the Oak Grove Plaza? There's a convenience store right across from.
Correct.
So what if that tenant leaves, all of the license expires, here comes a new tenant to come in? How are we going to handle that?
So I'll answer your question then. Regarding the recommendation, it wouldn't be impacted because the elementary schools aren't included. So Oak
Oh,
Grove.
thank
so
you.
Oak Grove Elementary School doesn't come into play. But in that scenario that you
okay.
propose, you know, you also have vesting of rights from if you have a retail sales use, you know, that use is still going to have vesting power. So if it's sold and you still had a license, it would continue to the next owner. That vesting would continue. They wouldn't have to comply.
If they still have a license, but a lot of times the owner of the real estate isn't the operator.
Right.
So how can you still have a license?
Well, if they had a valid, again, there's the zoning vesting part of it as well, right? That's what I'm trying to get to, is that,
Okay.
yeah, if you're vested and you have a use that you have there,
Okay.
you don't lose that use. You still have to get the proper permits.
Okay, all right.
You don't, but in this case, when they went through the public hearing, the issue seems to be that it is a vaping problem in the middle schools and high schools.
Okay.
Okay, so the recommendation is that they took out tobacco, and so it's just nicotine or hemp and alternative nicotine products. And it's only for Roanoke County high schools and middle schools, since that's where the request. So, for example, North Cross is not part of the recommendation. So it's just, and that's what the planning commission recommended.
Okay.
Now, we advertised the full extent of the ordinance, because that's what we did. The planning commission, but the recommendation by the planning commission is only for county high schools and middle schools, and that you take tobacco products out of the ordinance.
Okay. All right, a follow-up question, Philip. So I see Hidden Valley Middle School is in Roanoke City.
Correct.
How do we have,
We don't.
okay, and then,
What we did from the mapping part is we just wanted to show all the schools
Okay,
that were
all right,
county.
I got you.
That's all.
okay.
Same thing with the ones that are in town of Vinton.
I'm a
We don't have
visual guy, I'm
jurisdiction.
just kind of going what I see on the
Right.
circles and all that. Okay,
But we just wanted to map it just to see if it did come anywhere into the county.
okay.
Anyone else have any questions? Mr. Thompson?
I do have a question, actually. What about an area, say for an example, a large grocery store is new, coming in? Are they able to sell these products, or?
So, I don't know if Peter wants to weigh in here on the legal part. There is an exemption. If you get a permit, like an ABC license permit,
That's
I
great.
believe that you are exempt from the regulation. So if you're able to get that, then I think it exempts you from this law.
Okay.
That is correct. Any establishment that holds a license to sell alcohol is exempt from this regulation. So foreseeably, any grocery store that would sell alcohol, this would not affect those in any way.
Okay.
Just for clarification, Mr. Lubeck, that's defined by the General Assembly's
Yes,
bill?
sir.
Good, thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
You didn't touch on any of this, Mr. Thompson. Did anyone else have a question? You didn't touch on this, but was there any dialogue at the Planning Commission concerning any program of advertising campaign addressing the risks of vaping that you know of?
I like the school officials will talk more about that.
Okay.
I know there was a lot of discussion that they brought up some items. Again, part of this is the zoning ordinance amendment. in dealing with the regulation of land use. So that kind of goes outside the purview of the ordinance amendment.
Okay.
But it's something that, if you're interested, I guess you could have that discussion with them.
Yeah, and I was interested in hearing about some data since beginning of school. Maybe some of them can address that. Okay, that being said, thank you, Mr. Thompson. Appreciate your presentation and answers. We will now open the public hearing. We appreciate all who've come to address the board today. When your name is called, please come forward and state your name and address prior to sharing your comments. Each person is permitted to speak up to 3 minutes. At the front of the podium is a light system that tells you how much time you have remaining. When the light changes from green to yellow, please share any concluding remarks. When the light changes from yellow to red, your time is ended. While the board desires to hear from all who desire to speak, we ask that speakers refrain from repeating comments already made by others. At this time, our first speaker is Christopher, is that Benson? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Benson, if you come forward and give us your name and address for the record, we appreciate it.
Christopher Benson, 3141 Clayview Circle, Salem, Virginia, 24153. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Chris Benson, and I'm the principal of Hidden Valley Middle School in Roanoke, Virginia. Today, I want to address a growing concern that impacts the health and safety of our children, the increasing accessibility of vape products to minors in our community. I respectfully request the adoption of an ordinance that would prohibit the retail sale of vape products within 1,000 feet of schools in Roanoke County. Despite laws prohibiting sales to minors, vape shops near schools send a conflicting message. The bright packaging and sweet flavors are not targeting adult smokers only. They're designed to appeal to curious teenagers. Studies show that the flavors are a major gateway for youth to try vaping, leading to nicotine addiction and, in many cases, a transition to traditional cigarettes. The proximity of vape shops to schools normalizes vaping for children, making it appear harmless or even trendy. This undermines the hard work of parents, guardians, and educators who strive to teach kids about making healthy choices and avoiding addictive substances. Instead of viewing vaping with caution, students may see it as just another part of their environment, increasing the likelihood of experimentation and eventual addiction. The health risks are alarming. Research links vaping to serious lung damage, respiratory problems, and long-term cardiovascular issues. For our youth, these risks are even greater. Furthermore, nicotine addiction can impair brain development, affecting memory, attention, and learning, abilities essential for success in school and life. Allowing vape shops near schools places temptation dangerously close to where our children learn and grow. We must recognize the power of environment in shaping behavior. If we want to protect the next generation from the dangers of vaping, we need stricter regulations to keep these shops far from schools. Let us prioritize the health and future of our children by taking a stand against this issue. Together, we can create a safer environment that encourages healthy choices and builds stronger communities. Thank you for your attention to this issue, and I am hopeful the Board of Supervisors will pass an ordinance prohibiting the sale of vaping products within 1,000 feet of a school.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Charlene Vale. Charlene, if you'd state your name and address for the record, and welcome.
Thank you. My name is Charlene Vale. I live at 5850 Wimbrook Drive in Roanoke, Virginia. Mr. Chairman, board members, I am the coordinator of health services for Roanoke County Schools and a registered nurse. According to the CDC's website, youth use e-cigarettes or vapes more than any other tobacco product in the United States. No tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, are safe for children, teens, or young adults. Most e-cigarettes contain nicotine, which is highly addictive. Nicotine can harm parts of the adolescent's brain that control attention, learning, mood, and impulse control. The e-liquid in these devices is converted into an aerosol by the e-cigarette. As I mentioned before, they contain nicotine at varying levels and can also contain food-grade flavorings, cannabis, or THC and CBD, propylene glycol, and vegetable glycine. Diacetyl is frequently added to the flavored e-liquid to enhance the taste. This can cause permanent scarring in the small branches of the airways and the lungs. Other medical issues that have been linked to vaping include increased chance of developing asthma or worsening existing asthma, organ damage from nicotine, especially the heart and brain, addiction to nicotine, and potentially cancer. It is also associated with EVALI, which is a e-cigarette or vaping product use associated with lung disease, which is a serious lung disease which causes widespread damage to the lungs. EVALI can be fatal. Vaping does not make smoke, but it can expose people around someone who is vaping to be exposed to the nicotine and other chemicals as well. Acute nicotine exposure can be toxic, and children and adults have been poisoned by swallowing, breathing, and absorbing vaping liquid through their skin or eyes. The vaping industry continually finds different ways to market these items to children. E-cigarette marketing, the availability of flavored products, social influences, and the effects of nicotine can influence youth to start vaping. Companies create new vessels for these vapes to look like common household items like USB drives, key fobs, and inhalers to avoid detection by adults. Adults have an important role in protecting our youth from vaping. This includes parents, caregivers, educators, school administrators, healthcare providers, community partners, and lawmakers. States and local communities can implement evidence-based programs and services to reduce youth vaping. This includes preventing easy access to these items. I support and strongly encourage you to support the adoption of the ordinance prohibiting the establishment of vape and tobacco stores within 1,000 feet of schools in our community. This ordinance can reduce the accessibility of these products to our youth, discourage experimentation, and promote healthier lifestyles for our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ken Nicely. Mr. Nicely, we know you were going to have a statement, but you're also going to read them from someone else, so.
Yes, sir.
I'll
With
give
your
you a little
permission.
extra time to do that.
All right, thank you so much. And good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. First of all, thank you for your work and service on behalf of the citizens of Roanoke County. As you may be aware from news reports, underage use of vaping products is currently a leading health concern in communities across the nation, including our own community in Roanoke County. Rates of nicotine addiction and vaping with THC products have increased at alarming rates, which presents serious concerns for the health of children and youth, as well as challenges for schools trying to educate and intervene. Such addictions have also been associated with rising rates of depression and anxiety symptoms among teenagers. The children and youth of Roanoke County are not immune to these dangers, as indicated by survey data of self-reported use among students, as well as school data reporting discipline incidents related to vape use in schools. Our high school principals report that student vaping is one of their biggest challenges currently in our schools, and they are concerned that vaping products are readily being sold to our underage youth in many stores in Roanoke County where these products are sold. As a school division, we are doing our part to address this concern. The vaping epidemic was a primary topic of our most recent School Health Advisory Board meeting, and the group asked me to investigate advocacy measures that could be taken to curb the availability of these addictive products to our children and youth within the community. The school board has also asked our staff to investigate this problem and diverted approximately $130,000 in funding to invest in vape detection systems for our high schools to help principals combat this problem and get students the help they need with addiction. Our health education efforts with students have been impactful and have contributed to students having a better understanding of the harmful effects of these addictive behaviors. I'm also asking the Board of Supervisors to partner with us in these efforts to protect the children and adolescents of our community, starting with increased enforcement of underage retail sale of tobacco, vaping, and THC products. I'm specifically here today to ask you to enact a local ordinance as permitted by the new state law, HB 947. While current vape stores would be exempt from such a restriction under the state law, enacting a restriction would prevent additional stores from opening within close proximity to our schools and would send a clear message to the community. Ideally, a prohibition on retail sales of these products would extend far beyond 1,000 feet of school, but it is a start, and we ask for your support. I do thank you for your partnership and consideration. And with your permission and indulgence, Mr. Chairman, I do have a letter from Ms. Cheryl Forciani, our school board member from Windsor Hills, who is attending her daughter's state semifinal volleyball game this evening and cannot attend. And she states the following: thank you for allowing my letter to be read aloud tonight at this meeting, and thank you for your time and service. I'm writing to you tonight as I unfortunately cannot attend this meeting due to Hidden Valley High School's volleyball state finals taking place in Christiansburg. Go Titans. It is both an honor and privilege to serve as an elected official on the Roanoke County School Board for Windsor Hills District. I'm asking for your support for a local ordinance that would prevent future vape and smoke shops from opening within 1,000 feet of all Roanoke County schools who serves students in grades K through 12. We would be remiss to exclude parochial and private schools and elementary schools as they are just as susceptible. I'm not advocating to stifle legitimate business. I believe in the principles of a free market. However, it becomes a serious concern when businesses prioritize profit at the expense of our children's health, directly marketing addictive and harmful products to children, and in too many cases, illegally selling these products to minors. Our children deserve protection from businesses that engage in these unethical practices. While I respect the right of everyone to run a business, it's reasonable to ask that these shops be established away from our schools. Ask anyone familiar with these strategies of big tobacco. This kind of targeting isn't accidental. It's a deliberate attempt to create future customers by appealing to the most vulnerable. You might say, but they're required to check ID. And you'd be right, they're supposed to card, but they often don't, and I witnessed this firsthand. So let me pose this question. If these businesses aren't targeting children, why are they choosing to open near our schools? The answer is obvious to me, and it should be to everyone in the room. It's time to stop turning a blind eye to this issue and protect all K-12 children who attend schools in our county. Sincerely, Cheryl Fachani. And I do have several other letters from some of our principals and other staff members, which, with your permission, I'll just present to the clerk for the record.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Our next speaker is Tammy Newcomb. Ms. Newcomb, would you please come forward and state your name and address for the record? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tammy Newcomb. I live at 4120 Twin Mountain Drive, Benton, Virginia. Thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. I'm here to discuss a pressing issue that affects the health and well-being of our youth in Roanoke County, as you've heard, and it's the prevalence of vape and tobacco shops near our local schools and our communities. And I want to emphasize, the vape and tobacco shop is the title of the stores that I'm referring to. Currently, there are 10 vape stores clustered in one town that is 3.17 square miles, and the adjoining Roanoke County properties that we call Benton. Of the 10, 4 are in Roanoke County, and those 4 are within a half a mile of Wambert High School, which our students from our high school live. I know recently I reported 9 stores. I stopped to get gas last week, and I couldn't believe it when I looked across the street, and yet another vape and tobacco store has opened. Data indicates that students in our area are using vape products nearly 7 times more than their peers in other high schools in Roanoke County. This alarming statistic highlights the urgent need for action. Here's real data. As of today, 705 vape detections, that means someone's walked into a bathroom and set off the alarm in Wambert High School, compared to the next highest school in a Southwest County school, which is 185 hits. And from there, the other 3 are only in double digits. I advocate for an ordinance establishing a minimum distance of 1,000 feet between vape and tobacco retail shops and our schools. This will not do anything to the current stores already opened, but it does send a clear message to our community that you now know. You now know that high concentration of vape shops near our school normalizes it, makes it more appealing and accessible to our students. You now know the harmful effects it has on the health of our children. I want you to walk into these stores, see what we're up against. It's THC products, it's drug paraphernalia, nicotine vapes. They're flooding the doors of our schools and in our nation. Passing this ordinance will position our community as a leader in the fight against youth vaping. It demonstrates a commitment to ensure that our schools remain safe spaces focused on education rather than harmful substances. In conclusion, let's take a stand for our health and future of our kids. Let's start by instituting this 1,000 buffer zone around schools. We can mitigate the risk associated with vaping and tobacco. One last thing I encourage you to do. Limit the number of such stores in our community. If each of those vape stores were ABC stores, you would open your eyes. They're selling marijuana and THC. It's the same thing. Thank you for your attention in this critical matter, and I hope you will support the ordinance to safeguard our youth. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. James Soltis. Welcome. If you'd state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jamie Soltis. I live at 2209 Glory Drive, Salem, Virginia, 24153. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I stand before you today to ask you to adopt an ordinance banning the building of any new vape shop within 1,000 feet of any school in our county. I believe this measure will help protect our children from the predatory marketing tactics of vape companies and reduce easy access to these harmful products. Vape companies have long targeted our youth with colorful packaging, enticing flavors, and social media campaigns that glamorize vaping. They present these products as trendy and harmless alternatives to smoking. Many parents have expressed to me, in my role as both a middle school principal and a high school principal before becoming the deputy superintendent, that they believe vaping is safer than smoking. However, this, as you've heard, this couldn't be further from the truth. The close proximity of the vape retailers to the schools significantly enhances students' ability to obtain these products. We've seen numerous instances where these establishments, either knowingly or through negligence, sell vape products to underage students. Even more concerning is the practice of legal-aged individuals purchasing these products and then reselling them to minors, often on or near school grounds. Just this past week, in one of our discipline review team meetings with a student who was a third-time policy violator, the student and her mother indicated that the student had just walked into the store and bought the vape, the THC vape, and they had sold it to her. In a nearby district, when conducting drug tests, and by the way, that parent had reported that to the police, and it wasn't the first time that her daughter had got it from the store. In a nearby district, I oversaw drug testing for extracurricular athletes. The majority of the infractions involved students testing positive from using a vape for either nicotine or marijuana. The statistic is alarming and indicative of a growing problem. What's more, many of these vapes contain not just nicotine, but as I said, also THC. By allowing the vape retailers to operate near our schools, we're inadvertently facilitating easier access to these harmful substances. And I'll echo the comments of some others who said that it also kind of destigmatizes it and makes it like it's acceptable as part of what we do. The ordinance would reduce the visibility and accessibility of these products to our students, making it more challenging for them to obtain the vapes. As an educator, I believe that one of my primary responsibilities is to protect our children and provide them with safe, healthy learning environments. I feel advocating for this ordinance is a step in fulfilling that responsibility, and I appreciate your consideration. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Nancy Hans. Nancy, if you'd state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Nancy Hans. I'm at 1610 Westover Avenue, Roanoke. Good evening. My name is Nancy Hans, Executive Director of the Partnership for Community Wellness, formerly the Prevention Council. We closely work with Roanoke County Schools, Roanoke County Police, and many other partners to keep our children, teens, families, and communities safe, healthy, and alive. For the past 24 years, our organization has provided prevention and education around substances that can impair our children, teens, and young adults. Since 2002, we have collected data on both risk and protective factors. For purposes of tonight, I will highlight two. Cigarette use by high school teens in 2002 was 57%. Now in 2024, it is a single digit of 9%. However, by 2014, a company called Juul brought a new kind of smoking into our lives, and especially to our kids. Since 2016, the data on vaping is anywhere between 19 and 41%, depending on the year. This is all thanks to Big Tobacco 2.0. These vape products come in many different packages and under many different names, and they are not regulated. There are currently only 34 FDA-approved vape products. We have thousands in our stores. These products include chemicals that are altering our teens' brains, gummies to stimulate focus, vapes that circumvent burning tobacco, and syrups that claim to calm the mind. Vape pens contain alcohol, CBD oils, as well as mushroom-based products. These products can bind to the same receptors in the brain as opioids do, which is why they can be so addictive, especially at a young age. Using substances, especially at a young age, increases chances of becoming addicted by the early 20s. In October, I met a young man, 23, a county graduate, who is still trying to stop vaping and recently turned to the new product, Zyn, that does have tobacco, to cut down, but this product still has nicotine in it. He started vaping at 15. At our mom's incarcerated program at the Western Regional Jail, half of our new class said that they had started with vapes at 13. PCW advocates for this ordinance of these stores to be 1,000 feet from any school. A very similar ordinance was enacted by one of our Chesterfield County last year to 2,000 feet. We also ask that all vape and smoke shops be strictly reminded that they must card, as we know of several shops that are selling illegally to under 21 years old. We ask every adult in Roanoke County to join us in helping us support healthy choices for all of our children and teens. This is an adult problem and a kid consequence. On January 8th, I have been asked to come to the Student Advisory Council to talk to the students that are there about the vaping issue. We also are sending vape products to Dr. Michelle Peace at VCU, and she is internationally known, and she is testing these products, and then will be able to give us what is in them. She's been able to do that for the past 2 years. This is a community problem that can only be corrected by a community response, and I thank you very much for putting this high priority.
Thank you. Anyone else wanting to speak before we close the public hearing that hadn't signed up? Okay, with that said, we will now close the public hearing. At this time, is there a motion to approve the ordinance amending the zoning ordinances proposed and included in the board packet?
I would like to approve the ordinance amending the current zoning ordinance as proposed and included in the board packet.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mahoney.
I believe the intention of this ordinance and all the people who have spoken tonight are acting in good faith and is critically important. And I think the dangers of vaping are well proven and are dangerous. I just don't believe that this ordinance accomplishes what the advocates are recommending. Look at the maps that Mr. Thompson has shown us. This ordinance would not apply to Cave Spring High School. It would apply to Cave Spring Middle School. I honestly don't believe that seventh graders are going to be running across 5 lanes at 221 to go to an establishment that might in the future open across the street from Cave Spring Middle. From looking at the map, I think there are 5 properties that potentially are C2 that would be able to open in this situation. With respect to CTE, looking at the map, I'm not quite sure if there would be any risk around CTE. The way the circles are drawn, it encompasses Burlington, but we've already eliminated the impact of Burlington on this ordinance. It has no effect on Glenver High or middle school. The circle does show touching a piece, but the kids at Glenver ain't going to be running across I-81. So this ordinance has no effect in the Glenver area. No impact at Hidden Valley, no impact on Hidden Valley Middle School because it's Roanoke City. We don't have control of that. Northside High and Middle, when you look at the circle, it affects some of the properties that are on Thur Lane, but the last time I was on Thur Lane, all the properties on Thur Lane were either hotels, motels, or restaurants, and they all have ABC licenses. So under the state enabling legislation, it does nothing. It has no impact. The one impact that I do see is at William Byrd. And directly across Byrd, there are, was it 5 properties? 5 properties that potentially could affect. So it makes sense probably for Byrd. But the 1,000-foot distance is arbitrary. There's nothing magical about 1,000 feet. Why not 500 feet? Or as Ms. Hans indicated, 2,000 feet. Was it Chesterfield or Henrico? That makes more sense, but that's not the legislation that we have that enables us to act here. I guess I'm a little concerned that we are going to brand all these business owners as being criminals because they're not following the law. I'm sure there are people who don't follow the law. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I was in high school, and to buy beer and wine, you had to be 18. The topic of conversation at the lunchroom at my high school when I was 16 and 17 is what store I could go to buy a six-pack of beer without being carded. Folks, that has been happening, I'm 76 now, that has been happening for a whole lot of time. Are there business owners who violate the law? Yes, there are. But who has the ultimate hammer to enforce that? Just like ABC, if you're selling alcohol to underage kids, ABC comes down and pulls your license. Let's have the same, I guess it's Commonwealth of Virginia bureaucracy that issues licenses for these products, have them enforce the law. And when you pull somebody's license, that's going to send a heck of a lot bigger message than anything we're doing here. I struggle with enforcement. We adopt this law. Realistically, how do we enforce it? I'd rather have the state entities that issue the licenses enforce it, because they have a whole lot more muscle than we do. I was at my granddaughter's in cheer squad, Cave Spring High School. I was at a cheer competition at William Byrd, I think last month. And I was happily or pleasantly surprised when I saw the signs that you have the vape detectors in the restrooms there. It seems to me that the first order of enforcement are the parents. I'm sorry, folks, mommy and daddy, do your job. Educate your kids and discipline your kids. Second line of enforcement seems to be the schools. You're catching them a whole lot quicker than I think this ordinance would accomplish. I applaud Roanoke County Public Schools in terms of the actions they're taking to enforce and try to mitigate the dangers of vaping. I think you're doing a great job. I just don't think this ordinance accomplishes the goals of what we all want to accomplish: protect our kids and educate them as to the dangers of vaping. This ordinance doesn't do it. If you're a kid at Cave Spring High School and mommy and daddy gave you the keys to the car, well, when you look at the circle, there's no place within 1,000 feet for Cave Spring, but assume there was, and we had this ordinance in place. All you do is drive the car down Brambleton Avenue, and you go by Brambleton Center, and you go by Cave Spring Rescue, and there are either 2 or 3 vaping and tobacco stores right across the street from Cave Spring Rescue. So we have an ordinance that restricts you to 1,000 feet, but I drive down the road outside of that 1,000-foot circle, and the kid is going to be able to buy something we're trying to prohibit, and we're assuming that the owner is going to violate the law. I just don't see this ordinance achieving the necessary and laudatory goals of what we want to accomplish. I know we got to do something. I listened to what Tammy Newcomb said. She described a solution that ought to occur at the General Assembly that addresses the problem at the source. This is an indirect attempt that sadly, I just don't see accomplishing its goal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Mahoney. Does anyone else has any discussion on the motion? If not, I want to have a comment or two.
I would like to, Mr. Chairman. I would like to say that Mr. Mahoney makes some good points, and I think that some of what he says is is valid. All of what he is saying is valid. But I disagree with the end summary. I think we've got to start somewhere. And I think even in these small steps, we're sending a message that the students will hear. And because of that, I'm going to be supporting this motion.
Thank you. I think this is just one tool in the toolbox addressing this problem. And it's sad, it really is. It really is sad to, even since you put the vape monitors in the bathrooms. And Ms. Newcomb, I understand the problem's been around for a while. We walked in one day to tour the school, and I said, there's a ceiling tile that's open, you must have a water leak. And there was no one else in the boys' bathroom. And so she came in and said, no, that's where they've been hiding their vaping tools or pipes or whatever they use. And so I think this is a small step. And by the way, I did some research on this. The General Assembly passed what they call a block of votes. They put about 20 to 30 bills because they didn't think it would be contested, and they just arbitrarily approved all the bills, of which this was one of them. So I applaud them for coming up with something, but that's not always going to address the complete problem. The enforcement is probably the best thing, and I'm sure that there's a problem with staffing the enforcement that's needed on a spot check basis, but in my opinion, that needs to be ramped up too. And there needs to be some penalty for people not checking IDs and selling to minors. So that's a solution. This is a solution. And you know, when I was in radio years ago, before I got a real job and never looked back, we used to do public service announcements, PSAs, all the time on a variety of community issues and problems, some that were developed by the U.S. government, some that were developed by the Virginia Broadcasting Association. I don't know today whether that's something that's going on. It mainly was an AM radio years ago, which now is not as popular as FM and satellite. But I know one thing, some of them were pretty catchy when they were talking about the problem, and it was talking about cigarette smoking. And, you know, I used to smoke cigarettes. And I started out smoking a pack of cigarettes when I was 19 years old because I wanted to fit in with some of my other peers. And I smoked Carlton cigarettes, which if anybody remembers, they were like smoking air. And so eventually, you know, like, this isn't enough, I need something else. And thank God I stopped years ago. And I'm glad I never continued on that. Today I can't stand to be around any kind of smoke. And as the old saying is, the worst kind of person to be around is an ex-smoker. But this is a small step. I don't think the General Assembly did a deep dive in making stronger suggestions in legislation. And the only way you're ever going to address this issue in terms of making it a more encompassing, if you will, is to continue advocating our legislators. And I don't mean just here, I mean the whole Commonwealth of Virginia. And I'd recommend you go after the committees where bills like this would reside, and I don't know the name of the committee this might reside in, but that's what you need to do. You've got to do that. So, but I do think we need to do something, and I'm going to support this, but I think it's going to have to be a 3, 4, or 5-pronged solution. And you're going to have to count on a latter step of alternatives to make it more impactful. Will we ever completely address it all? I don't think so. But I can tell you one thing that was impressed upon me was when you looked at that lung of someone who'd been smoking for 20 years, that was sobering, folks. You took that seriously, and today that's still etched in my mind. And I hope the Lord has cleared out my health, because I sure as heck don't envy people you see walking around today having smoked cigarettes for years. And you know, this society in Virginia and all over the country, but particularly in the East Coast where the colonial states formed, was an agrarian society. Today, that's not the case anymore. Not like it used to be in the colonial days. And so tobacco was a cash crop. And it got embedded in our in our culture, and it just continued along the way. This is worse, and it's harmful, and I hate to see kids walking around doing this. It's just a sad commentary. And, you know, we got to make the parents understand the impact it's having on their health, the children's health. And that's going to take a community, commercial, public service effort, TV, and also radio. And, you know, it used to be we didn't charge for those kind of things. You didn't charge for a 30-second commercial or a 60-second commercial when it was public service. I guess that rule still applies today. So I'm going to support this measure. And anyone else on the board have any further discussion on this?
I have something I'd like to say.
Ms. Shepherd.
I actually am not sure who drove the wagon on getting this ordinance done, whether it was Tammy Newcomb or Ken Nicely or who, but living in Benton, and I live right behind William Byrd High School, and when you pull out, you literally right in Roanoke County do have all of those spots, but even a mile down the road, as you go into the Benton town limits, you have even more of them. And Tammy May can speak for how many are actually even further, 1,000 feet, but actually in the town of Benton. I'm not sure, unless it is, and let me just even back up further. I have 4 kids that have graduated from William Byrd. Fortunately, I know one of them is vaping, and I absolutely hate it. But it's got to be a lot of the kids that are literally leaving school and going to these spots, because I see a lot of their friends doing it. And how can that many shops that close make that much money and be able to have the clientele, I guess you would say, that supports them and keeps them in business? So my biggest hope would be if these do go out of business, that someone can't come in and reopen it and start again, but I know that's not a part of the ordinance. But like I said, I definitely think it's needed based on the number that we have at William Byrd.
But it's outside of the 1,000-foot limit.
It is, but hopefully with us starting this, maybe Benton will take a step further, the town of Benton, and then perhaps.
But Tammy had the better solution. Not this ordinance, she had the better solution.
Oh, I would love to go further up the ladder if we could. That would make me completely happy, and I would be on board to help do it.
Yeah.
But I just know with the number that she stated from William Byrd and seeing the number of them that are right there, you're right, it's not going to stop the kids from going, but hopefully, eventually, they'll all dissipate out of business, at least, if they're not.
You know, you can tell it's a state problem, not only a local problem. I mean, the Attorney General of Virginia, in one of our reporters for Cardinals News, stopped in southwestern Virginia and bought some stuff, came back and had it analyzed, and boy, the report that came back from the lab wasn't very colorful. It was pretty bad stuff.
Yeah.
It was being sold, you know, right out there in broad daylight. And so this is just one small step. And if we, in this Commonwealth of Virginia, and our legislators and our school systems take a state position on this, and I don't know if there's been the state convention for public schools yet or not. Has that been earlier this week, or is it coming later in the week?
School Board Association this week.
Okay, good. Well, I hope this is discussed, and I hope that y'all can adopt a resolution as a body that more needs to be done on this, if that's what the temperature is of that association. So there being no discussion, there being a motion and a second, I'm going to ask the clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Radford?
Yes.
Mrs. Hooker?
Yes.
Mr. Mahoney?
I support the intent, but this is just virtue signaling. I vote no.
Mrs. Shepherd?
Yes.
Mr. North?
Yes. With that said, we'll move on to item L, citizens' comments and communications. Are there any citizens wanting to address the board that have not submitted a form for this part of the agenda? Okay. And we'll move on to M, reports and inquiries of board members. Ms. Shepherd.
I do not, well, I do have a few things to report. This is the first time that I was able to go to the VACO conference at the Homestead this past week, which was really enlightening, especially the K through 12 mental health, and also the opioid epidemic, and setting in seminars for that. I really felt like I learned a whole lot listening to those. I've also attended the Mount Pleasant Community Meeting, which was great. We actually had Brian Hallahan and several people, Eric Orange, were at the meeting and talking about different issues going on right now in that community as well as others. I also had announced to them, and I want to thank, I guess I would say Parks and Rec or General Services for getting the pad paved at the library for our, excuse me, our ADA citizens. So that's been done. And other than that, I think that's all I've got.
Thank you. Ms. Hooker.
Just a couple of quick notes. I too we all went to VACO actually. I think it was a really good experience, and I learned a lot on the education committee, and there's some really great conversations going on about what the schools need, how the state needs to step up and do some more to fund adequately, and I've passed off that flyer to several individuals. And congratulations to Phil for winning second vice president. He'll be in the lineage to move upward onto that leadership. Had a Dry Hollow community meeting earlier last week, and it was a good turnout. Really appreciated the staff that participated in that for some answers to some serious transportation issues there. And then the Carter Industry Insight Tour was fabulous. I know there were several of us that attended that also, and I think it's really important that we're sharing the career opportunities right here in our valley for our students. So that's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Mahoney.
As the board recalls, I am this board and Roanoke County's representative on the TAP Board of Directors, TAP Total Action for Progress. Last week, a week ago today, we had a TAP meeting, an annual meeting. At that meeting, we talked about the accomplishments that TAP has achieved. We've had almost 1,000 kids in Head Start. We've been able to provide further training, GEDs for about 540 young people. Did weatherization for about almost 100 homes. We tried to help a lot of women who were subject to domestic abuse, I think over 430. All told, TAP probably served over 8,000 citizens in our community. And sort of the highlight of our meeting, TAP awarded its 2024 Cabell Brand Award to Mayor Sherman Lee, which was a wonderful recognition for him and all of the volunteers activities that Sherman has done during his life here in the Roanoke Valley. And a good report on all the good things that TAP has done the past year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mahoney. Mr. Radford.
That was not my phone. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I too went to the VACO annual conference. I'm on one of those steering committees. The one I'm on is Energy, Environmental, and Land Use. And for a day and a half, what really was the overall theme that was going through our committee was they've talked about small-scale solar uses versus large-scale. We went back and forth on that with several speakers. We talked about data centers coming to your town or your county one day and the demand it has on water and energy use. We then went over and talked about affordable housing. Heard many people tell me that affordable housing is the housing stock today, and there's no such thing. There's inexpensive housing. So we really listened to a couple different counties on how they were trying to tackle affordable housing. And then I too want to congratulate Mr. North. I've got to kind of set the stage though. All five of us, or four of us, were in the small room nominating committee. Mr. North was running against four other candidates for this position, and They were from Northern Virginia. We had one from Loudoun County, one from Fairfax, and, here we are, just little old Roanoke County down here in the southwest. And we're up there rubbing elbows with our northern neighbors, and, they like to tell us what to do every now and then. So, but it was a process that took about 45, 50 minutes. They got to give a little 3-minute talk about themselves why they want to run for that position. So they eventually end up 3 years later as the president of the association. But we were all in the room, and, I didn't think Mr. North had a chance, but he did have a good speech. What clinched it is the third member of the committee ask everybody, do you have the time to do this? And so a couple of them went, and Mr. North got up there and said, I got all the time you want. And so I think that nailed it at the time. So there we go. I believe this is the first time we've ever had somebody from Roanoke County in a leadership position for VACO. So congratulations, Mr. North.
Thank you. I'll just say this is the first time in 10 years that anyone from this region, which includes Montgomery County, has had a executive leadership position on VACO. And I'll give you one thing I did. I don't really like writing 2-page letters. If it can't be said in a couple paragraphs, then you probably shouldn't even be writing it. But when the applications all came in, they sent us a nominations package. Well, I had sent them a resume, and it was, bulleted, and you could read it very quickly. And I had my good-looking picture on there from a few years ago, and nobody else did. And everyone else had written a letter. They didn't have the picture on there. And I don't know. I just rolled the dice. What the heck you got to lose? And I'd have to say I was probably the senior member of that group that was. Who's laughing over there? So I just want to tell you one thing right now. Don't nobody mess with me, because I got energy that exceeds all expectations.
Yeah.
So, but thank you for being there and supporting us. I thought for a moment it was the last meeting of the Seinfeld show when they were all in the courtroom. There was people from all over the state there, and they told us to go out of the room, and I was like, I'm going to my room, getting ready for dinner. When someone said, nope, they just decided, come on back in. And it was fun to be there. It was a special moment, and I want to thank the support of this board.
I'm going to interrupt you for a moment. One other thing that I don't think anybody has mentioned here is you graduated from Supervisor School.
Oh,
That's right.
So congratulations on that.
Yeah, I took 3 courses this year to get certified.
About time you're certified to be a supervisor.
I'm certified, all right. I should have done it sooner, but COVID nipped it in the bud. But anyway, that was a special moment, and we're going to work hard, all of us on steering committees with different topics, and so we're going to advocate for those positions and represent Roanoke County and the region well. Didn't meet with Grant Neely of the Blue Ridge Innovation Corridor, who's working with the General Assembly to get some funding, which they're probably going to tell them to do a study first. I-73 initiative is retired. It's now all about developing 220 from the Carolina line all the way up into the Allegheny region. It's called the Blue Ridge Innovation Corridor. You're going to be hearing more about this. It'll be mentioned in our State of the County, hopefully. We did go to jailer graduation again. Boy, the jail is really recruiting. This is their 2nd or 3rd graduation this year, and there's plenty of positions open. And they hope to hire some more folks. Mr. Radford and I went to the Roanoke Valley Allegheny Regional Commission annual meeting. I did recently, the Roanoke Regional Legislative Meeting, which is made up of all the counties in the Roanoke Valley Allegheny Regional area, from Montgomery County all the way to Allegheny and then down to Franklin. And I just want to, at this time, wish all of you a safe and happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Because I think we all need a little bit of a break, because we got that sprint to Christmas holidays. As soon as we come back, you only got 3 weeks, so you better start shopping now, because it's not going to be for 3 weeks this year between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So with that said, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Madam Clerk, you don't have to call the roll since you all said aye. Meeting adjourned.
Some gradual clearing and rain tapers off Wednesday night. Windy and cold. Low temperatures in the lower 30s to 41 for Charlottesville and Fredericksburg.
It's the TED Radio Hour from NPR. I'm Manoush Zomorodi. Today on the show, an exploration of one of the most powerful forces in our lives, the sun, starting on September 1st, 1859. That day, a British astronomer named Richard Carrington was looking at the sun and sketching sunspots, the dark patches on the solar surface.
He was watching through his telescope and drawing them by hand.
This is astrophysicist Noor Rawafi.
And all of a sudden, he saw something new.
It was a bright light that lasted for nearly 5 minutes.
And he just was mesmerized of this new thing that he never seen before.
Carrington had no idea what it was until the next day when strange things started happening. Electric currents zipped through telegraph wires, setting telegraph stations on fire. Communications the world over were knocked out. Meanwhile, bright colored lights, aurorae, lit up the sky.
People were seeing aurorae in daytime around the whole globe.
The New York Times described them as streamers rapidly changing hue from red to orange, orange to yellow, yellow to white, back to brilliant red. In the Rocky Mountains, the sky was so bright at midnight that confused gold miners woke up and started making breakfast. Carrington connected the dots and hypothesized that the bright light he'd seen was a solar flare, a storm on the sun so powerful that the radiation it released reached the Earth, disrupting the magnetic fields that surround our planet.
But there were a lot of skepticism. It took really decades afterwards to realize, yeah, actually we are connected to the sun.
Carrington was eventually proven right. This incident is now referred to as the Carrington event, and it is the strongest geomagnetic storm ever recorded. Meaning, if it were to happen today,
in some places, people will be out of power for months, maybe for even years. And the economic losses will be in the trillions of dollars. Nowadays, we depend a lot on satellites, communication satellites or GPS satellites over there in space. So these geomagnetic storms can impact technology in space. And one prime example of this is the loss of SpaceX of nearly 40 satellites in 2023 or 24. That's actually was the result of a geomagnetic storm.
it just knocks them out.
Exactly. Absolutely.
So solar storms can spell disaster. But the good news is that now scientists like Noor Rawafi at NASA are constantly monitoring sunstorms.
We know what the sun does at any moment. When there is an explosion, a flare, or coronal mass ejection, we see it. We know what direction they are going, how powerful they are, how fast they are, and we can even predict what would be the impact here on the Earth environment.
But Noor and his team also have a spacecraft that is orbiting the sun and is due to fly closer to it than ever before, collecting data so that we can better understand why these storms happen and solve other solar mysteries.
Without the sun, there will be no life on Earth, there will be no solar system, there will be no Earth. So, in a way, we are the sons of the sun. It's our star. We owe our existence to the sun. But also our daily life depends on it.
The sun is at the center of our solar system. It rises and sets on every day of our lives. We worship it, absolutely have to have it, but there is so much we don't know about this massive star that we depend on. So today on the show, making sense of the sun. What powers it, and how we can replicate and harness that power. So, back to Tunisian astrophysicist Noor Rawafi and his team of international scientists at NASA. Their spacecraft, the Parker Solar Probe, has been orbiting the sun for the past 6 years, completing a full revolution around it every 3 months. And on Christmas Eve, 2024, it is due to touch the sun.
Since the dawn of the space age, NASA has wanted to fly a spacecraft as close as possible to the sun.
Here's Nora Rawafi on the TED stage.
But getting very close to a star is extremely risky and really hard. How would we protect a probe from just melting? How could it adjust for any problem on its own when you cannot communicate with it? Until recently, we simply didn't possess the technology. In 2018, that all changed with the launch of Parker Solar Probe. Parker Solar Probe is the first spacecraft to ever fly through the solar corona. It has revolutionized our understanding of the sun.
So the probe is roughly the size of a small car, and making sure it wouldn't go up in flames as it approached the sun was an engineering feat.
The only thing standing between the probe and incineration is an ingenious 11.5 centimeter thick, 2.3 meter wide carbon foam shield. On Christmas Eve 2024, the shield's sun-facing side will endure about 1,000 degrees Celsius.
The shield reflects light, absorbs heat, and is cooled by a network of water-filled pipes.
All this system will be operating on December 24, 2024, when Parker Solar Probe achieves humanity's closest ever approach to a star. This will be a monumental and audacious achievement. In 1969, we landed humans on the moon. In 24, we're going to embrace a star.
It's being described as an attempt to touch the sun. Is that accurate?
Well, we are flying within the solar corona, so the solar corona is part of the sun. So we are flying through it. We are touching the atmosphere of the sun.
And what information will be coming back to you?
Parker Solar Probe have a whole suite of instruments around it. We have an imager, a white light imager that will image the solar wind and all that solar activity that happens as it propagates from the sun all the way out. We have also instruments that measure magnetic fields, temperatures, densities, fluctuations, velocities, energetic particles that are flying almost at the speed of light.
How does it send back all of this data to you?
That is a challenge for us because the geometry doesn't allow us to talk to the spacecraft all the time. So we need the spacecraft to be in certain areas of space when the antenna can point to Earth. That way we can communicate, and basically we send information to the spacecraft. The spacecraft can send us data and information as well. The sun holds over 99.8% of the solar system total mass. Its sheer size is mind-boggling, requiring more than 1.3 million Earths to fill its volume. All of that mass is in the form of plasma, a glowing soup of electrically charged particles. At the solar core, gravity is exceedingly high, producing temperatures in excess of 15 million degrees Celsius. The solar surface is plenty hot, 6,000 degrees, hot enough to melt anything we know. But in the corona, we're talking millions of degrees Celsius. How can it be over 300 times hotter despite being the sun's outermost layer? Physicists have suggested since the 50s that all of that heat must generate a constant outflow of particles. This is the solar wind. It speeds away at up to 3 million kilometers per hour. At that speed, you can get from the Earth to the moon in under 20 minutes. Behind all this is the sun's magnetism. As solar magnetic fields twist, bend, and tangle, they store enormous amounts of energy. And when they snap, huge explosions like flares and coronal mass ejections release this energy and turn it into heat and accelerating the plasma. It takes only a handful of these strong events to fulfill our current energy needs for some 200,000 years. That is the whole span of modern humans' existence. The sun does that in minutes to a few hours. These same explosions propel particles to nearly the speed of light and turn them into formidable hazard to spacecrafts and to humans in space. Our power grid can fall victim, like in March 1989 in the northeast of the US, Canada, when a succession of solar storms caused an intense geomagnetic storm. So we need to learn how the sun does all this and more.
What is the prediction in terms of solar flares and storms in the next decade or so?
Well, we are at the solar maximum now, and that's actually one of the big mysteries when is predicting how strong the solar cycle will be. That's one of the big things that we are trying to understand, but it's not really an easy at all. So we need some new missions to help us understand what is going on in the interior of the sun itself, and observe the sun for a long time from different viewpoints, to come to terms how the magnetic fields form in the solar interior and how they rise to the surface, and what is the source of their cyclic nature. And if you think of it, Parker Solar Probe is flying through a region of space that we never visited before. And whatever measurement we make there might actually carry with it a potential discovery for us.
You have a look of absolute delight on your face as you're describing this. Did you think you would learn these things in your lifetime?
Sometimes it's still it's like a dream, but you are living it. And the fascinating thing about Parker Solar Probe is also that the pace of the mission is so fast, so rapid. Every 3 months, we have a flyby around the sun, and we have a new load of data. We are like spoiled kids in a way. Whenever we get a new load of data, we jump on it. We are so curious, what is new in it? The data we are getting from it is so loaded with knowledge, with new things that we need to investigate. That is going to take us decades from now to look into it. And in a way, Parker Solar Probe will serve generations to come, many generations to come. And for me, Parker Solar Probe is a mission for the ages.
That was astrophysicist Noor Rawafi. He is a senior scientist at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory and the project scientist for NASA's Parker Solar Probe. You can learn more about the Parker Solar Probe mission at science.nasa.gov/sun. And you can see Noor's full talk at TED.com. On the show today, the sun. I'm Manoush Zamarodi, and you're listening to the TED Radio Hour from NPR. We'll be right back.
Support for Radio IQ is provided by Mark Nelson and Virginia Wills Trusts and Estates, a Charlottesville law firm with a focus on estate planning, estate administration, and probate. More information at vawills.com.
On the next Fresh Air, Trump versus the media. He's called the media enemies of the people and threatened retribution, including jailing reporters, investigating NBC for treason, and suggesting CBS's broadcast license be taken away. We'll talk with David Remnick, editor of The New Yorker, and Marty Barron, former editor of The Washington Post. Join us.
That's Fresh Air, weekdays at noon on Radio IQ.
You know when you're driving and you get to your destination, but the story you're listening to isn't finished? Well, take it with you. Download the Radio IQ app for your smartphone. It's free, easy to use, and will let you keep moving with the pace of the world.
Support for the TED Radio Hour comes from the estate of Joan B. Kroc, whose bequest serves as an enduring investment in the future of public radio and seeks to help NPR be the model for high-quality journalism in the 21st century. From Workday, with AI at the core of its system, Workday is committed to delivering continuous innovation to prepare organizations for what's next. Workday, an enterprise platform for finance and HR rock stars. And from the Public Welfare Foundation, committed to advancing transformative youth and criminal justice reforms.
It's the TED Radio Hour from NPR. I'm Manoush Zamarodi. And on today's show, the sun. In Central California, there is a government research facility, a massive campus with a particular building, a building like no other. It's 10 stories tall, the size of 3 football fields stacked side by side. And in there is the largest, most energetic laser in the world. a laser that crisscrosses from one side of the building to the other, being amplified and then split, amplified and split again and again and again until there are 192 lasers, all firing at once. To create, for just a fraction of a second, a burst of energy, a blip of burning plasma, a star.
So fusion is the reaction that powers the sun.
This is Tammy Ma. She is the scientist leading the Fusion project at the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory.
Fusion is one of the most fundamental reactions of the universe that makes life possible here on Earth and is responsible for almost everything in the world around us.
In space, stars make fusion look easy. Their gigantic mass creates such immense gravitational forces that hydrogen is squeezed together, fused together into the heavier element of helium.
And through that process, generating a ton of energy, a ton of heat. And so you can think of the sun and the stars as these giant balls of plasma that are constantly fusing.
There is no way to create that kind of gravity here on Earth. But Tammy and her colleagues do have a way of bringing those elements together. That super powerful laser.
And if we can recreate fusion here on Earth in a controlled way, if we can make it work, it is the holy grail of energy.
Fusion means unlocking a different kind of nuclear power.
On the TED stage, Tammy Ma recently explained the big benefits of fusion power. For one thing, it creates a tremendous amount of energy.
How tremendous? Well, 1 single pound of fusion fuel has the same amount of energy as 5,000 barrels of oil, or 3.5 million pounds of coal.
And speaking of fuel,
the fuel that we need for fusion is also very abundant.
Fusion needs hydrogen isotopes called deuterium, which is found naturally in seawater, and another one called tritium.
We actually have enough fusion fuel on Earth to last us 30 billion years of human consumption at today's levels.
Fusion also promises to be clean because when hydrogen and helium are fused together, they don't release carbon.
Carbon is nowhere in that equation.
And fusion is considered pretty safe.
In order to start a fusion reaction, we first have to put energy into the system to make the atoms fuse.
To stop a fusion reaction, the power going in just needs to be turned off. And while fusion creates some waste,
it's not the kind of waste that will last for tens or hundreds of thousands of years. Instead, the low-level nuclear waste of fusion can decay away in just decades. Now, to be fair, there are some downsides to fusion too. Fusion is incredibly complex and incredibly difficult. The development of fusion has been and will be expensive. But the potential benefits of fusion are so great that it is worth it.
I mean, there is a joke. I'm sure everybody always says this to you, Tammy, but the joke is like, fusion is just around the corner. It is the new source of energy in the next 5 years, the next decade. It's kind of like the sign at the bar that says, free beer tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. So we call fusion one of the grand scientific and technological challenges of humankind. We've been trying to recreate fusion on Earth since we understood what fusion was. So British scientists actually figured out the fusion reaction and patented it in the early 1940s. But you have to build tools that are strong enough that can help you to contain that plasma. And you have to keep it going long enough that you could generate a lot more energy out than you put in order for fusion to be commercially viable.
Fusion experiments, big and small, are happening all around the world. One major milestone many are working towards, fusion ignition.
So the definition of ignition is more energy out of the fusion reaction than the laser energy that it took to actually get the reaction going.
That is the goal of Tammy's lab, which cost $3.5 billion and took 12 years to build.
Let's go back to that ginormous laser. It's called the National Ignition Facility, or NIF. We're going to split that beam into 192 ways and then directed towards the fusion chamber. Half the laser beams go up and half come down, and they're going to concentrate their light on a tiny cylinder that sits right in the middle, about the size of a pencil eraser. The lasers go into that cylinder and create a bath of X-rays that then envelop the little fuel pellet that sits right in the middle. We're going to reach temperatures of over 180 million degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than the center of the sun, and pressures that would feel like 100 billion Earth atmospheres pressing down on you. And then we start a little spark right in the center, creating a miniature star, and with it, a huge burst of energy. And if we do it right, we can actually get a whole lot more energy out than the energy that went in to start all of this.
So NIF is the most energetic, the largest laser system in the world. Explain what that actually means, like how much energy it uses.
So every time we fire those lasers, it is 1,000 times the power of the entire U.S. electrical grid.
Whoa.
I know that sounds crazy.
Yes, it does.
You know, every time we fire the lasers, it's not like your lights flicker at home, right? You don't know we took a shot. So what we're doing is we're taking a huge amount of energy, but we're compressing it down into just nanoseconds, fractions of the blink of a human eye. And so that's why we're able to actually draw our energy off of the Alameda County electrical grid. It's about $21 in electricity per shot. So not crazy.
No.
And then that energy all gets concentrated on that fusion fuel to try to recreate a miniature star in the laboratory.
I mean, it sounds like the most incredibly powerful high-tech oven on our planet. But like an oven, can you turn on a light and see what's happening inside? How do you know it's working?
That is a great question. What we're able to do is with our diagnostic instruments, try to pull out all the information that we can. We're able to capture particles that can tell us by how fast they were moving, what temperature the plasma was. We have some of the fastest X-ray cameras in the world, capable of 50 billion frames per second, so that we can...
50 billion?
50 billion frames per second, yeah.
Wow.
So we can piece those together and create a movie of how that plasma is actually forming, and from that infer how good the experiment was.
Our team at Lawrence Livermore National Lab are the stewards of work that started in 1960 because of national security. We need to understand fusion to understand how to ensure that our U.S. nuclear arsenal stays safe and effective. And that is what has provided the steady funding to pursue this very difficult physics challenge over decades. And in that time, we've improved our physics understanding and computational simulation models. We've designed new diagnostic instruments capable of taking better, clearer, faster pictures of the experiment. We've continuously pushed up the laser energy and found ways to build better targets. And guess what? In December of 2022, we finally did it. Our team at Lawrence Livermore National Lab demonstrated fusion ignition. For the very first time in human history, we generated a controlled thermonuclear fusion reaction in the laboratory that generated more energy out than went in with the lasers to start it. And now we've actually been able to repeat ignition 4 more times in just the last 15 months, with our most successful experiment giving us over twice as much energy out as we put in with the lasers.
Getting ignition was the core goal of the NIF. your laser. It was a key milestone for fusion science. But what was that moment like for you personally?
Funny enough, Manoush, I have actually slept through a lot of those experiments.
Oh.
We run the machine 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But I did get the call the next morning when I was at the airport. And my boss actually calls me and whispers into the phone and says, "Tammy, I think we got ignition." And I paused for a second because this is something that we've been working on for, like I said, decades.
Yeah.
And I just burst into tears. I was so excited.
You did?
Yeah, and I started jumping up and down at the gate. And so I was just absolutely thrilled, and tears were rolling down my face because it's something that you and a team of people have dedicated your life to, and to be able to be there for that breakthrough was just enormous.
So, are we done? Well, not quite. In order to move towards that fusion energy future, we'll have to figure out how to harness this energy in a working fusion power plant. And to be clear, there's still a long scientific and engineering road ahead. Just to build on our successes at NIF, we'll have to build more efficient lasers, mass manufacture targets, and figure out robotics for automated operations and more. The depth and breadth of this challenge will require sustained investment from government and private industry, and all of us working together. We're all racing to make this a reality, but there's still a lot more work to be done.
What do you say to critics who, maybe they say the same thing about landing on the moon? Why are we pouring billions and billions of dollars into projects that may or may not work when we could be using that money right now to solve problems with technologies, take solar, for example, that we do know that they work?
Yeah.
How do you respond to people who feel that way about fusion?
I respond that it is the human story, and it is what makes us human to continue exploring and continue pushing the boundaries. Because there's all kinds of benefits as you do that you don't even know about. For example, extreme ultraviolet lithography, EUV lithography, which is the technology that allows us to print smaller and smaller computer chips with greater and greater capability. That technology was actually a spin out from laser fusion research. And it was nothing that we intended to do, but there's all kinds of benefits to doing forefront science and technology development. And fusion is one of them. And for me, even being able to help a little bit, being able to push the boundaries and do science and generate conditions like we have at the center of the sun, right here on Earth, experiments that have never been done before, is just so exciting and so motivating. And if I can contribute a little bit to pushing the field forward, I'm happy.
That was Tammy Ma. She leads the Inertial Fusion Energy Initiative at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. You can watch her full talk at ted.npr.org. On the show today, the sun, including how humans can collect all the energy that naturally emanates from it.
As humanity, we've always harnessed the power of the sun. People putting out their clothes to dry, people drying fruit and vegetables, people orientating their houses towards the sun. This is the story of our survival.
This is Rebecca Collier. She is the executive director of Renew 2030, a global coalition working to rapidly scale renewable energy, especially solar energy.
In the turn of the last century, in the 1900s, people started to really think about how to do that from a technology and an electronics perspective. And so the solar panel was born. And at the beginning, it was really inefficient and really expensive to build. But by improving the technology bit by bit by bit, the cost of a solar panel has come down to now these days being cheaper, not just than coal, but also then natural gas power. And that means that solar, both distributed solar that you can put on your backyard or large-scale solar that might cover a football field, it's really now cost competitive and scalable.
Finally, some good news about dealing with climate change. The world is on track to install 29% more solar technology in 2024 than the previous year. More than half of the energy added to the U.S. electrical grid comes from solar now. Those rates are even higher overseas. But Rebecca's organization wants countries to make this transition even faster.
We want solar alongside wind to make up the backbone of the electricity system by 2030, and that feels like a Herculean task.
I mean, it's interesting. It's popular in my neighborhood to put solar panels on your roof, but I haven't done it yet because it's still something you have to go seek out. It's still putting in a fair amount of money before you see returns. So as easy as it is, and as much as I see it in my life, it still feels like we haven't quite gotten to the moment where it takes over. That's just my personal experience, but tell me if that's indicative of what you're saying.
I really think it depends where you are. So I want to turn this back and ask you loads of questions. Like, what would it take? Do you want more leaflets through the door? Do you want neighbors knocking on the door and saying, oh, let's do it together? Do you want a tax rebate from the government? Or is it that you actually, when you do a renovation, you want your contractor to include it in a package and not even to have a think about it? Those are some of the things that we've seen work in other places. You're right, it's not everywhere, but we saw a huge uptake in Europe after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, partly because people were so concerned around their energy bills. In America, you've got some amazing credits in the Inflation Reduction Act, and in China, it's panel after panel after panel being rolled out across homes and schools and hospitals. So I think in some markets we've reached a tipping point, but in others, it's still just getting off the ground.
In a minute, what a solar success story looks like. We hear about one of the biggest solar plants on the planet in Morocco. On the show today, making sense of the sun. I'm Manoush Zamarodi, and you're listening to the TED Radio Hour from NPR. Stay with us.
Weekday mornings are a juggle, sometimes even a struggle. Morning Edition from NPR News eases you into your day and keeps you company through the chaos of a busy morning. Hear interviews that give you context on the day's biggest stories, along with reporting and updates on the latest breaking news. Stay on top of the world with Morning Edition every weekday.
That's Morning Edition, beginning weekdays at 5 a.m. on Radio IQ.
From the terrifying to the beautiful.
I was in Tanzania studying chimpanzees.
To the comforting.
I'm with 2 award-winning chefs from Slovenia.
To places lived and places unknown.
In this small village in West Africa.
We start in Jamaica.
Check in with New Zealand footballer.
South Africa's
the US and the EU
in Myanmar.
Here in the UK this month.
To all parts of the world.
The BBC World Service.
World news from the BBC beginning at 9 o'clock every evening on Radio IQ.
Support for the TED Radio Hour comes from the Council for Interior Design Qualification, whose mission is to assess practitioner competency to create design solutions that safeguard public health, safety, and welfare. Learn more at cidq.org/NPR. From BetterHelp, committed to helping clients with issues ranging from relationship challenges and goal setting to grief and depression. Learn more at betterhelp.com/public. And from ECMC Foundation at ecmcfoundation.org.
It's the TED Radio Hour from NPR. I'm Manoush Zamarodi. On the show today, making sense of the sun. And we were just talking to Rebecca Collier, who leads Renew 2030, an organization with partners all over the world working to accelerate the growth of solar power. Rebecca says solar technology is not a one-size-fits-all solution. There are small-scale distributed solar installations, the kind you might find on a house or hospital rooftop. But in other parts of the world, enormous solar installations are being built in vast sunny deserts, which could eventually power entire nations. That is the hope for Morocco.
Home to the largest solar energy plant in the world.
Nur, which means light in Arabic, is so vast it can be seen from space.
The Noor Ouarzazate solar plant is located southeast of Marrakesh, on the edge of the Saharan desert.
The landscape out here, it's almost like it's from another world. It feels like we could be on Mars.
Morocco has always had to import its energy, so this new approach has gotten a lot of media attention.
In Morocco, we don't have petrol, we don't have gas. To be independent, we have chosen to use the clean energy because of the climate change challenge.
A few years ago, Rebecca went to see the plant for herself.
It's a magical experience. We were driving over like low, bumpy hills, and at first you couldn't see the plant in the distance, and you turn a corner and then suddenly, even though you're still quite a few miles away, you can see the sparkle of the panels shining in the sun in the distance. And you can see this huge tower in the center of a football field after football field of solar panels. It's almost like the stem of a flower with all the solar petals around it, all facing in towards a central stem. And then the sun bounces off the panels, and the majority of them are mounted on the ground so that they can reflect the sun's beams directly into a central tower. Much as you would do if you're catching light off a mirror and trying to make it shine on the wall, but every single panel pointing in one direction, and that turns a traditional electricity generating turbine.
And where is the energy going from there?
Well, the real benefit of renewables is where it stays in country for local use in boosting the economy and boosting local industries that have an aspiration to also use greener, cleaner alternatives. And that's actually what's happening in Morocco. It's helping to boost Moroccan industry, and then the additional electricity, when it's produced, can be sold for a premium, much as countries have exported oil and coal and gas in the past. Morocco has the potential to become a solar energy exporter.
So solar could be a source of income for a country that's never been part of the energy market. This could be a real economic boost for them.
Well, I mean, that's certainly the thesis of many of us in this space, is that we see new solar states emerging, ones with the ability to produce not just solar electricity for domestic consumption, they can produce electricity for export, and that can be a new source of revenue and change the sort of energy and geopolitical landscape for a more secure and reliable one.
I mean, it's like the amount of land that we're talking about is just extraordinary, but that's what's needed.
Well, I mean, I don't want the listener to come away with the impression that we're putting concentrated solar plants everywhere. This is a technology that is really, really suited to areas with the best potential around the world. So large, flat, desert-like spaces. These can produce the best solar thermal potential. But a solar rooftop on a school in a city, or solar on your household, is also helping to offset emissions as well. So it's a combination of both the little and the large.
I mean, that's so interesting. We were just talking to Tammy Ma, who heads up the fusion project at Lawrence Livermore. And, for her, it's the tech. That's the barrier to entry. But that is not the case with solar. The technology is there. The sun is shining. It sounds like you're saying a marketing issue.
Well, let's first of all just say up front, most people really don't object to solar. Plenty of times, it's just that they haven't thought about it. They have been told that it's unreliable and needs lots of repairs, so they don't feel confident in the aftercare or the follow-up that might come with installing solar. So if you've got that sweet spot where there's some initial curiosity and the barrier isn't something insurmountable, then indeed I didn't want to say it's a marketing problem, but it's a familiarity and confidence problem, and often what's needed more than anything else is knowing that a community similar to yours has done a project that's similar to yours.
Because we hear that a lot from critics, like, well, what about the days when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine? Renewables are too dependent on nature, which we can't control.
Well, that's one of the brilliant patterns of nature, is that often our demand for electricity is at the sunniest peaks. We've now got wind that can complement nature. It's often the windiest hours are when the sun isn't shining. And we've also got multiple ways to store the sun when the sun actually stops shining. It's batteries and grid technology that can store wind and solar or transport them from where they're produced to where they're needed. And so that's one of those enduring myths about renewable energy, but it's not borne out by the science at all.
I mean, it's very tempting, Rebecca, to be like, oh, phew, there's a good climate story. Something is working. We can do this. And if we just, figure out this last few steps to go solar, all will be well. Can we say that, or is that way too optimistic?
Well, I think if we had time, you'd be absolutely right. We have incredible engineers and incredible communities, and we will find our way, I think, slowly and surely to that type of genuinely more equitable, low-cost energy future. The trouble is that time isn't on our side. So the reason why we created Renew 2030 was so that we didn't lose sight of the urgency of ramping up solar and wind.
Mm-hmm. It's not like 2050 going, carbon free.
It's not like 2050. No, you're right. And so I do think that, the new technology stories are the hopeful side of the climate agenda. They really are. If I had started out 20 years ago and solar and electric vehicles were where they are, I wouldn't have been able to give you a hopeful story on climate change. And also when I started out in climate, we were on track for a decimating 6-degree future of warming. And we've cut that by most expert predictions to 3 degrees of warming. But that is still the dangerous tipping points in our weather systems that we are facing daily now. So I don't want people to take away a black and white picture of hope or despair or all or nothing. And the technologies that have come down in cost that we've been talking about today, concentrated solar thermal, different forms of storage, distributed solar, they really are a hopeful story. But also, they aren't moving fast enough to help combat the worst effects of climate change, and they need a helping hand. And so that's where projects like mine come in.
That's Rebecca Collier, Executive Director of Renew 2030. You can see her on the TED stage at TED.com. So we have talked mainly about the sun as a source of power and inspiration for scientific achievement. But beyond the hard science, most of us might think of the sun in simpler terms. It is our steady companion who wakes us up in the morning and slips away every night. But most days pass without us really thinking about this relationship with the sun. Science journalist David Barron says sometimes it takes a solar event, like an eclipse, to remind us just how awe-inspiring our sun is. Here he is on the TED stage.
I am not some mystical, spiritual sort of person. I studied physics in college. I used to be a science correspondent for NPR. In the course of working on a story for NPR, I got some advice from an astronomer that challenged my outlook and frankly changed my life. You see, the story was about an eclipse, a partial solar eclipse that was set to cross the country in May of 1994. And the astronomer, I interviewed him, and he explained what was going to happen and how to view it. But he emphasized that as interesting as a partial solar eclipse is, a much rarer total solar eclipse is completely different. In a total eclipse, the moon completely blocks the face of the sun, creating what he described as the most awe-inspiring spectacle in all of nature. And so the advice he gave me was this: before you die, he said, you owe it to yourself to experience a total solar eclipse. Well, honestly, I felt a little uncomfortable hearing that from someone I didn't know very well. It felt sort of intimate, but it got my attention, and so I did some research. Now, the thing about total eclipses is if you wait for one to come to you, you're going to be waiting a long time. Any given point on Earth experiences a total eclipse about once every 400 years. But if you're willing to travel, you don't have to wait that long. And so I learned that a few years later, in 1998, a total eclipse was going to cross Aruba. So I talked to my husband, and we thought, well, February, Aruba? Sounded like a good idea anyway. So we headed south to enjoy the sun and to see what would happen when the sun briefly went away. Well, the day of the eclipse found us and many other people on the beach waiting for the show to begin. And we wore eclipse glasses with cardboard frames and really dark lenses that enabled us to look at the sun safely. And a total eclipse begins as a partial eclipse, as the moon very slowly makes its way in front of the sun. So first it looked like the sun had a little notch in its edge, and then that notch grew larger and larger, turning the sun into a crescent. And it was all very interesting, but I wouldn't say it was spectacular. I mean, the day remained bright. If I hadn't known what was going on overhead, I wouldn't have noticed anything unusual. Well, about 10 minutes before the total solar eclipse was set to begin, weird things started to happen. A cool wind kicked up. Daylight looked odd, and shadows became very strange. They looked bizarrely sharp, as if someone had turned up the contrast knob on TV. And then I looked offshore, and I noticed running lights on boats. So clearly it was getting dark. And then all of a sudden, the lights went out. Well, at that, a cheer erupted from the beach, and I took off my eclipse glasses because at this point during the total eclipse, it was safe to look at the sun with the naked eye. And I glanced upward, and I was just dumbstruck. I had lived on Earth long enough to know what the sky looks like. I mean, I'd seen blue skies and gray skies and starry skies and angry skies and pink skies at sunrise. But here was a sky I had never seen. Up above, it was a deep purple gray like twilight, but on the horizon it was orange like sunset, 360 degrees. And up above, in the twilight, bright stars and planets had come out. And they were all in a line. And there, along this line, was this wreath woven from silvery thread, and it just hung out there in space, shimmering. Now that was the sun's outer atmosphere, the solar corona. And pictures just don't do it justice. It's not just a ring or halo around the sun. It's finely textured, like it's made out of strands of silk. So there was the sun, and there were the planets. And I could see how the planets revolve around the sun. It's like I had left our solar system and was standing on some alien world looking back at creation. And for the first time in my life, I just felt viscerally connected to the universe in all of its immensity. And I stood there in this nirvana for all of 174 seconds, less than 3 minutes, when all of a sudden it was over. The sun burst out, the stars and the planets and the corona were gone. The world returned to normal. But I had changed. And that's how I became an umbraphile, an eclipse chaser. And so this is how I spend my time and hard-earned money. Every couple of years, I head off to wherever the moon's shadow will fall to experience another couple minutes of cosmic bliss. And over time, I've become something else, an eclipse evangelist. I see it as my job to pay forward the advice that I received all those years ago. And so let me tell you, before you die, you owe it to yourself to experience a total solar eclipse. It is the ultimate experience of awe. Now, admittedly, some folks consider my evangelizing a little out there, my obsession eccentric. I mean, why focus so much attention on something so brief? This is a lesson I've learned, and it's one that applies to life in general. Duration of experience does not equal impact. One conversation, hell, one glance can change everything. Cherish those moments of deep connection with other people, with the natural world, and make them a priority. Yes, I chase eclipses. You might chase something else, but it's not about the 174 seconds. It's about how they change the years that come after. Thank you.
That was science journalist David Barron. You can watch his full talk at TED.com. Thank you so much for listening to our episode as we tried to make sense of the sun. It was produced by Katie Monteleone, James Delahousie, Rachel Faulkner-White, and Fiona Guerin. It was edited by Sanaz Meshkinpour and me. Our production staff at NPR also includes Matthew Cloutier and Harsha Nahata. Our executive producer is Irene Noguchi. Our audio engineers were Robert Rodriguez, Gilly Moon, and David Greenberg. Our theme music was written by Ramteen Arablouei. Our partners at TED are Chris Anderson, Roxanne Hylash, Alejandra Salazar, and Daniela Balarezo. I'm Manoush Zamarodi, and you have been listening to the TED Radio Hour from NPR.
Support for the TED Radio Hour comes from Progressive Insurance, working to help protect small businesses and the owners that run them, offering customizable coverages to salons, accounting firms, tradespeople, and more. Learn more at progressivecommercial.com. And from the Council for Interior Design Qualification, whose mission is to assess practitioner competency to create design solutions that safeguard public health, safety, and welfare. Learn more at cidq.org/NPR. This is NPR.
3 years ago, cinematographer Helena Hutchins was shot and killed on the set of Rust. Now the film is scheduled to premiere in Poland. Director Joel Souza finished the film, but still wonders if he should have.
It's something I still struggle with, but, I just feel like for me, that was the right thing to do.
We'll hear more on the next Morning Edition from NPR News.
Morning Edition comes your way weekday mornings from 5 to 9 on Radio IQ.
Radio IQ is broadcasting in digital on WVTF Roanoke, WRIQ Charles City Richmond, WURV Richmond, WVTU Charlottesville, WVTW Charlottesville, WVTR Marion, WISC FM Wise, WQIQ Spotsylvania, WIQR Lexington, WEHC Emory, and in Richmond on 92.5 and Fredericksburg on 94.9. Radio IQ, a service of Virginia Tech.
At 2 hours GMT, welcome to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. I'm Paul Moss. Ukraine fires American missiles into Russia. Russia raises the spectre of nuclear retaliation.
This is a qualitatively new phase of the Western war against Russia and will react accordingly.
The charity Médecins Sans Frontières has suspended operations in Haiti after its patients were murdered by police. And the US Congress is facing a new question. Which bathroom should the first transgender representative use?
This is an issue that Congress has never had to address before. We will accommodate the needs of every single person.
Benjamin Netanyahu has paid a visit to Gaza, offering rewards to helpers of Israel, more threats against its enemies. And 500 years after dying in battle, King Richard III speaks again.
We firmly decree that the side Edward shall have the name Steele.
All that and more after the news.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News.
The medical charity MSF says it will stop its operations in the Haitian capital Port-au-Prince because of threats from police. It's one of the biggest providers of care in Haiti where medical services have collapsed. More now from Will Grant.
MSF's decision comes just days after two patients the organization was transporting in an ambulance were apparently murdered by police officers. Médecins Sans Frontières says that on the 11th of November, one of its ambulances carrying 3 young men with gunshot wounds was stopped by Haitian law enforcement officers. Apparently supported by a paramilitary self-defense group, the men attacked the vehicle, removed 2 of the patients, took them outside hospital grounds and executed them. The humanitarian group denounced the violence, saying their personnel had been tear-gassed and held against their will for several hours.
Prosecutors in New York have backed delaying sentencing in Donald Trump's hush money case until after he completes his upcoming presidential term. Mr. Trump was found guilty in May of falsifying business records to cover up payments to the porn actress Stormy Daniels. He was due to be sentenced next week. Nada Tawfiq is in New York.
Prosecutors have now outlined what they believe are the appropriate next steps in this case now that Donald Trump, a convicted felon, will be the next occupant of the White House. The Manhattan District Attorney said no current law establishes that a president's temporary immunity requires dismissal of this case. They said the court must balance competing constitutional interests and preserve the independence of the presidency and the integrity of the criminal justice system.
U.S. officials say Russia intercepted 2 of the 8 American-supplied ballistic missiles used by Ukraine to strike Russian territory on Tuesday. The attacks came soon after Washington gave its permission for such strikes. Moscow said 5 missiles were shot down and that 1 had caused a fire at a military facility in the Bryansk region. Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov said the attack was an escalation and that it could not have happened without the help of U.S. military experts. Vitaly Shevchenko is the BBC Monitoring's Russia editor.
It's not inconceivable that the permission to use these missiles was given to Ukraine, specifically because time's running out for Joe Biden, and when Donald Trump moves into the White House, things may change dramatically. Looking at his rhetoric, which strongly suggests that reducing aid to Ukraine is a possibility. So that's why Ukraine is desperate to use all it has at its disposal at this time before things may change dramatically in January next year.
This is the world news from the BBC. The wife of the Ugandan opposition figure Kizza Besigye has alleged that he's been kidnapped. Winnie Byanyima, a top UN official who runs UNAIDS, said he was last seen in the Kenyan capital Nairobi on Saturday. Ms. Byanyima said she had been told he's now being held in a military jail in Kampala in Uganda. Mr. Besigye led the Forum for Democratic Change political party, contesting and losing 4 presidential elections against the incumbent Yoweri Museveni, who's been in power for almost 4 decades. The United States has officially recognized the Venezuelan opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez as president-elect after the disputed election in July. The move has been described as ridiculous by the regime of Nicolás Maduro in Caracas. Mr. Gonzalez is living in exile in Spain. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he blocked the Israeli President Isaac Herzog from using Turkish airspace to fly to the COP climate summit in Azerbaijan last week. Mr. Erdogan said Turkey had suggested alternative routes. Mr. Herzog ended up cancelling his visit. The Spanish tennis player Rafael Nadal has ended his career with a defeat to the Netherlands at the Davis Cup. Nadal, who is a 22-time Grand Slam winner, lost in the first singles match. He had won his last 29 Davis Cup singles matches after a loss in his debut match in the tournament in 2004. He spoke to his fans after the defeat.
Honestly, it's been 20 years of a professional career in which you have always carried me along, in the good times and in the bad times. I want to say to all of Spain and also to the world in general, I have felt super lucky to receive so much love around the world, especially here in Spain.
That's the latest BBC News.
You're listening to the newsroom with me, Paul Moss. It's still not entirely clear who fired exactly what and where. Russia says it shot down 5 ATACMS missiles which had crossed into its territory. American officials have now said only 2 were intercepted, but what everyone agrees on is that we are now in a new phase of the conflict, with Russia using Western-supplied weapons to attack Russia itself. Ukraine had wasted no time. It had only just been given permission by the White House to launch American missiles over the border. But then Russia's response was also fast. Vladimir Putin formally confirmed he would lower the threshold required to use nuclear weapons against its enemies. From Moscow, our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, has this report.
Breaking news on Russian TV. Claims that Ukraine had fired 6 American ATACMS missiles into Russia's Bryansk region, though no reports of casualties. The response from Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, said the missile attack was a signal that the West wants to escalate the conflict. Published today, a Kremlin decree lowering the nuclear threshold. Russia now reserving the right to go nuclear, even if attacked by conventional weapons, if such an attack threatens Russia's sovereignty or territorial integrity. President Putin had promised changes to the nuclear doctrine weeks ago, a clear signal to Europe and America not to let Ukraine strike Russia with long-range missiles. Then, an even clearer signal. Russian nuclear exercises, a warning to the West not to cross Russia's red lines. But the key question, in Russia's war on Ukraine, would Vladimir Putin use a nuclear weapon? The lowering of the nuclear threshold does not mean that Vladimir Putin is about to press the nuclear button. These changes are designed, I think, at the very least, to put pressure on Western leaders who will now have to decide, is Putin bluffing or not?
Steve Rosenberg, that's a question which presumably keeps some Western leaders awake at night. But then, as our chief international correspondent Lise Doucette reminded me, they have heard this kind of rhetoric before from the current occupant of the Kremlin.
President Putin likes to keep the world guessing. It's not the first time that he has spoken about the threat of using nuclear weapons. He said in the past, I'm not bluffing. This time, they are saying it in ever more threatening words, accompanied by a new nuclear doctrine. Sir Keir Starmer described it as irresponsible rhetoric. But is it more than that? And Ukraine, of course, is waiting to see what their Western allies are going to do about it. Hence the very bitter reaction from President Zelensky, who didn't hear the kind of response he wanted from his Western allies in response to Russia's, raising this risk, this threat. And in fact, his comment was, well, they didn't even really discuss Ukraine at the G20 summit.
Ukraine wasted no time launching these missiles into Russia as soon as it was given permission to do so by the United States. It does seem like they're perhaps in a hurry, maybe worried about what Donald Trump will do when he becomes president, whether he might rescind the permission to fire those missiles into Russia.
They've probably been, their fingers on the button or whatever it is you do to launch them for months now. President Zelensky has been going around the world, asking is a polite way to say it, but begging for the permission to strike deeper inside Russia with these longer range missiles. And now he's getting it, as with all the other equipment he's got from the West, too little, too late, and in this case, just weeks before President Biden leaves office. So you understand why they were quick to fire them off immediately. There's also reports, Paul, that actually there aren't many of these missiles to come, that actually they may not be producing many more of them. So he may fear they're going to run out. And yes, he's got his eye on the clock and on the return to the White House of Donald Trump, who has made it clear repeatedly that he wants to end the Ukraine war in a day. Now, he never says how he's going to do that. And I mean, it seems naive in the extreme, but he knows the pressure could mount. And he may hope that using these new missiles can help strengthen his position on the battlefield, strengthen his position at any negotiating table, but there's a very real risk that they won't.
Donald Trump has said he can end the war in Ukraine in a day. I wonder if the fact that this nuclear threat has again been raised by Vladimir Putin might perhaps leave some people in the world perhaps a little more open to Donald Trump's doing so, simply because they're scared that the ICBMs might start flying.
Ukraine may now feel that we're on the back foot now. We're running out of manpower. We're fed up with our allies. They're fed up with us. We need something new. It's unpredictable, but maybe, just maybe, something can come out of this chaos. I just spent the weekend in the Gulf, and when I asked senior people in Gulf states, what do you think about President Trump coming back? And they said, well, at least we'll have some decisions.
Least Doucette. It is, the New York prosecutor said, a matter of balancing interests. On the one hand, Donald Trump has been found guilty of falsifying records to cover up hush money paid to a pornographic film actress he was alleged to have had an affair with. Mr. Trump was due to be sentenced for this on November 26th. On the other hand, Donald Trump has a rather high-profile job he'll be taking up come January 20th. And his lawyers argue it would interfere with his work as president to have a legal case hanging over him. They also say a Supreme Court ruling about leaders and law-breaking means that Mr. Trump should not have been prosecuted in the first place. We are, to say the least, in unprecedented legal territory. And as Neda Tawfiq in New York explained, it's going to take quite a while to sort out.
Prosecutors want the kind of legal process to play out on this attempt by the defense to try to throw out this verdict, this case. And that could take some time. And so I think with the prosecution here saying that one remedy, apart from an outright dismissal of this case, could be to freeze it, I think that really is an acknowledgement that perhaps getting through just the legal arguments of a dismissal could take longer and run into Donald Trump's presidency. So they are throwing that option there at the judge as he tries to weigh up what is the best way forward in this unprecedented kind of situation that they find themselves in. But nevertheless, prosecutors adamant that they don't think this case should be dismissed, that they don't think that Donald Trump's kind of temporary presidential immunity, as the defense argues, has any impact on a case that didn't deal with official acts in office and also doesn't deal with the fact that he is waiting for a decision. He has been convicted. So how do you move ahead then with a sentencing that was supposed to be next week? That is something that the judge is going to have to weigh up. A key piece of that, again, the transition, the independence of the presidency, because of course, just the spectacle of the president-elect going into court to be sentenced. That is the optics, of course, that I'm sure the judge understands the severity of that, the weight of that. And so he will have to factor in all of these things when he eventually weighs in on which side he agrees with here, or if in fact he comes up with his own remedy.
Neda Tawfiq. The charity Médecins Sans Frontières has a pretty tough reputation. Doctors Without Borders, as it's called in English, sends medical teams into some of the world's most violent and unstable conflicts. But even for MSF, the situation in Haiti has proved too much. The collapse of any meaningful central authority, the rise of gangs across the island. It's prompted MSF to announce it's suspending its operations there. Our correspondent Will Grant has reported from Haiti on many occasions and explained what had finally driven MSF out.
I think this decision to suspend their activities really comes at the end of a very, very difficult month for MSF. Specifically, they announced that on the 11th of November, one of its ambulances that was carrying three young men, was stopped by Haitian law enforcement. The Médecins Sans Frontières personnel on the ambulance were violently attacked. They were tear gassed, and two of the patients were taken from the vehicle, then taken outside hospital grounds, and MSF says they were executed by the police in conjunction with a paramilitary self-defense organization seemingly working alongside Haitian police officers. A horrific incident. MSF obviously say they have decided to suspend their operations in the Haitian capital with a heavy heart because they've been there for 30 years, but go on to list a number of other incidents in the recent past that have taken place that have simply made life unworkable for them for the time being.
Médecins Sans Frontières is just one charity, albeit a very effective one. How much difference is it going to make to the situation in Haiti if they do pull out?
They have a good reputation. They do important work in Haiti. By their own estimates, they provide care to more than 1,100 patients on an outpatient basis, more than 50 children with emergency conditions. They have 5 different hospital facilities and a number of these sort of mobile hospital units. So to have something like MSF operating is a very, very important resource, and I think it will be felt, albeit, not a huge organisation in terms of its reach. It is a very important one.
I remember talking to you earlier this year about the situation in Haiti when Kenyan police officers had arrived, and more are now promised. Is there any sign of security being re-established there?
Well, honestly, Paul, I don't think so. There was an initial improvement in matters, but it does now appear that it's been very, very transitory. It doesn't seem like any meaningful control of the capital has been gained by the Haitian police working alongside the Kenyan police officers. As we speak, there has been something around 25 killings in one part of the Haitian capital in a single day. The police say that it was the result of an attempt by gang members to take over an upscale suburb of Pétionville, and that residents themselves barricaded the streets, helped the police to defend the neighborhood from an invasion. As you can imagine, just spiraling violence that continues to worsen, and no sense at all that the Kenyan police officers have a handle on this situation. And of course, we have to add that politically it looked no better either. The interim Prime Minister, Gary Conille, was fired earlier this month by the ruling council, not even 6 months after he first took office.
Will Grant, you're listening to The Newsroom from the BBC World Service. Now, if you were listening around this time yesterday, you'll have heard our correspondent in Hong Kong describe how 45 pro-democracy campaigners were convicted of subversion and sent to prison. Well, Wednesday sees another trial, this time of one of the territory's most famous activists. Jimmy Lai was the founder and owner of the Apple Daily newspaper until it was shut down. The paper's reports frequently criticized the Chinese Communist Party. Mr. Lai is already in prison, held in solitary confinement for much of the past 4 years because of previous prosecutions. Our Hong Kong reporter Martin Yip joins us now. Martin, can you remind us what exactly is Mr. Lai being accused of in this trial?
So Jimmy Lai has been accused of conspiracy to collude with foreign forces. What it means is, according to the prosecutors, he's been trying to cajole with politicians in the United States and other places to put on sanctions against Hong Kong and mainland China officials in view of Hong Kong's political situation and the situation of human rights through his publication, the Apple Daily, and others in his Next Media Kingdom, as well as his own podcasts and online broadcasts. So that's the key allegations, and is a rather serious one imposed by the Hong Kong National Security Law, written by the Chinese Parliament back in June 2020. So if he will be found guilty, he could face life imprisonment.
I mentioned that he spent a lot of time in solitary confinement. He's not a young man at all. And I gather there are concerns about Jimmy Lai's health.
Yes, there were reports recently from his international legal teams arguing that he's not receiving care for his situations, including diabetes. But then there are clarifications, so to speak, from his local legal team here in Hong Kong, as well as a statement from the Hong Kong government rebuting all these claims insisting he's been looked after properly by the Hong Kong prison authorities. So this is quite an argument between each other. But it's reported that his international legal team has made an appeal to the United Nations human rights arms, trying to get his case heard by the international community.
Martin Yip in Hong Kong, thank you very much. Benjamin Netanyahu clearly meant to pack a punch with his visit to Gaza. Dressed in combat gear, Israel's Prime Minister surveyed the destruction and issued a threat to the Strip's Palestinian inhabitants. Harm one of our hostages, he warned, and we will pursue you, we will catch up with you. But there was also a reward on offer. Any Palestinian who helped find a hostage would be given $5 million, he said, and helped to leave the war-battered territory. From Jerusalem, our security correspondent Frank Gardner has this report.
Clad in flak jacket and helmet, Benjamin Netanyahu paid an unexpected visit to Israeli troops still battling the Islamist militants of Hamas. This war, now in its 14th month, has gone on far longer than anyone had hoped. Hamas's ranks and its weapons have been seriously depleted, but not destroyed completely. They're still inflicting casualties on Israeli soldiers. Mr. Netanyahu, speaking in the central part of the Gaza Strip, known as the Netzarim Corridor, vowed that Hamas would never regain control of the territory and said anyone who harmed the remaining Israeli hostages still being held in Gaza would be hunted down. The Prime Minister has come under fierce criticism from those here who believe he's not done enough to secure the release of the remaining 97 hostages.
And that report was from Frank Gardner. Back to the US now, where a new bathroom bill being proposed by the Republicans would stop the first openly transgender member of Congress from using the bathroom that corresponds with her gender identity. The South Carolina Republican Nancy Mace introduced the bill, which comes just a little less than 2 months before Sarah McBride is due to be sworn in.
I want to make sure that no men are in women's private spaces, and it's not going to end here. This shouldn't be going on any federal property. If you're a school or an institution that gets government funding, this kind of thing should be banned. I think it's sick, it's twisted.
Well, Stephanie Prentice has been following this story and joins me now. Pretty strong words there from Nancy Mace. She's not beating about the bush. What do we know about this bill?
Absolutely, Paul. So first, it is important that we clarify this is a bill that needs sign-off. So right now it's a proposal that's being pushed by some Republicans, and Nancy Mace, who we just heard, isn't standing alone in this. They want to prevent transgender people from using certain bathrooms, and they've said that Sarah McBride's election has really been the catalyst for this plan. The two-page bill says she shouldn't be allowed to use women's facilities in government buildings. This all comes at a time when transgender rights are really at the forefront of the political agenda over in the US. Donald Trump made anti-transgender themes a significant part of his election campaign. He pledged to impose wide-ranging restrictions on things including the school system, so he alluded to things like school policies on pronouns, bathrooms, locker rooms, which sports teams they can play on. And Nancy Mace also alluded to those sorts of spaces, saying she wants gender controls on what she called women's spaces, women's bathrooms, locker rooms, and changing rooms. If this was approved, the House Sergeant at Arms, a sort of internal law enforcement officer, would have the job of enforcing those measures.
So how is the idea going down generally?
Well, the resolution has sparked outrage among some Democrats. Some have called it bullying. Some have called it disgusting. Sarah McBride herself used social media to say this is a blatant attempt from far-right extremists to distract from the fact they have no real solutions to what Americans are facing. We also heard from Democratic and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. He was quick to condemn the idea.
This is what we're doing. This is the lesson that you've drawn from the election in November. This is your priority, that you want to bully a member of Congress as opposed to welcoming her to join this body so that all of us can work together?
House Speaker Mike Johnson appeared to sit on the fence about the issue. When he was questioned, he declined to comment how exactly it would be handled and whether he'll include it in the upcoming rules on how Congress will run.
I'm not going to engage in silly debates about this. There's a concern about the uses of restroom facilities and locker rooms and all that. This is an issue that Congress has never had to address before, and we're going to do that in deliberate fashion with member consensus on it, and we will accommodate the needs of every single person. That's all I'm going to say about that.
So Sarah McBride will be sworn in on January the 3rd, so a consensus will have to be reached before then.
Steph Prentice, thank you. Richard III was one of England's more controversial kings. For some, a great leader on and off the battlefield. For others, a cruel tyrant who, among other horrors, had two of his own nephews murdered. Historians still debate Richard's rights and wrongs. But now they can also listen to his voice, because a digital avatar of Richard III has been created and programmed to deliver an address conferring royal titles on his son, Edward.
We firmly decree, for us and our heirs, that the side Edward, our son, shall have the name, steel, title, dignity, and honour of the Principality of Wales and the Earldom of Chester.
It's more than 500 years since Richard III was killed by multiple blows to the head during the Battle of Bosworth. So how did scientists work out what his voice would have sounded like? Well, they enlisted the help of the veteran linguistics professor, David Crystal.
The first thing is you look at the spellings. Spellings were a real guide to pronunciation in the old days, and not a guide now. Modern English, no real guide from the spelling of a word as to how you pronounce it. But in the old days, spelling was a really useful indication. People wrote as they sounded to a very large extent in the Middle Ages. And then the second kind of evidence are the rhymes that poets used. Rhymes that don't work now, but they must have worked at the time they were written, otherwise you'd have been a lousy poet. So for instance, Chaucer, which is the period of Richard, of course. I mean, Richard's grandmother could have spoken to Chaucer. Chaucer rhymes words like, was and glass. So it must have been was and glass, that sort of thing. So the rhymes. And then the third kind of evidence is that during the 16th century, which is not so long after Richard, really, people started to write books and articles about how English words were to be pronounced. And so that kind of evidence, along with the others, means that you can reconstruct an accent from that period with, I would say about, 90% accuracy. You can never be 100%, but it was pretty good. I think we got as close as you can get to the speech of Richard.
Professor David Crystal. You've been listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Paul Moss. A reminder of our main story. US officials say Russia intercepted 2 of the 8 American-supplied ballistic missiles used by Ukraine to strike Russian territory on Tuesday, and that medical charity MSF is pulling out of Haiti because of the violence there. And that is it for this edition. From all of us here in London, goodbye.
Distribution of the BBC World Service in the U.S. is made possible by American Public Media, producer and distributor of award-winning public radio content. APM, American Public Media, with support from USB Technology, reminding consumers worldwide that USB-enabled products with the certified USB logos are designed for performance, power, reliability, and interoperability.
With the holiday season upon us, how are you choosing to celebrate? Admit it, what's better than a Hallmark movie? A new Hallmark Channel Christmas cruise set sail this week, which says something about our love for seasonal schmaltz. Next time on 1A, we have a guide to the best and worst and hear about the fairy tale endings that keep us coming back for more.
Charles lost everything when Cyclone Freddy swept through Malawi.
It was all so confusing. I didn't know what to do.
But now, Charles is one of the first people in the world to receive a kind of climate compensation to relocate and rebuild his life.
I am so excited because I will be in a safe place.
His story on the climate question after the BBC World Service news.
BBC News with Neil Nunes. The medical charity MSF says it will stop its operations in the Haitian capital Port-au-Prince because of threats from police. MSF said it could not continue when law enforcement became a direct threat. It's one of the biggest providers of care in Haiti, where medical services have collapsed. Prosecutors in New York have backed delaying sentencing in Donald Trump's hush money case until after he completes his upcoming presidential term. Lawyers for the president-elect want his conviction overturned. Officials in the U.S. say Russia intercepted 2 of the 8 American-supplied ballistic missiles used by Ukraine to strike Russian territory. Moscow said 5 missiles were shot down and that 1 had caused a fire at a military facility. Turkey's president says he blocked the Israeli president Isaac Herzog from using Turkish airspace to fly to the COP climate summit in Azerbaijan last week. Mr. Herzog ended up cancelling his visit. The wife of the Ugandan opposition figure Kizza Besigye has alleged that he's been kidnapped. Winnie Byanyima said he was last seen in the Kenyan capital Nairobi on Saturday. SpaceX's Starship giant rocket has launched on another test flight from Texas. Half of the Starship came down in the Gulf of Mexico and the rest in the Indian Ocean. The Spanish tennis player Rafael Nadal has played his final game of professional tennis. Nadal ended his career with a defeat in his first singles match against the Netherlands at the Davis Cup. And a painting by the Belgian artist René Magritte has sold at auction for more than $121 million, a record for a surrealist masterpiece. The Empire of Light features an eerily lit streetscape against a pastel blue cloudy sky. BBC News.
Imagine you live in a village. The sun shines, your crops grow, and you have a small herd of animals, chickens, goats, that provide you with food and an income. But one day, that's all gone. A hurricane drives your village and everything you know underwater. This is the reality for millions of people across the world. Climate change is likely making tropical cyclones more intense, more rain, more wind, and causing them to strengthen quicker. So people have much less time to evacuate.
Currently, we are experiencing a lot of rains. We have landslides, we have flash floods, people's houses have been buried.
Even efforts to rescue people are being hampered by the rains that are falling right now.
Where the landslides have happened, it's mountainous areas, so even going up there is not as easy at the moment.
In 2023, Hurricane Freddie swept through Malawi. Charles and Susan got caught up in the storm.
Around 2 in the morning, we had loud screams from outside, with people screaming, "Water! Water!"
It was all so confusing. I didn't know what to do.
The whole house was flooded with everything inside. So all my animals, all my goats, pigs, my cows, everything went in the floods.
Men, women, children, and the elderly had to climb into trees to escape the rising waters.
At dawn, some boats came and rescued us.
I lost everything, including my spare clothes. The only things I had were the clothes I was actually wearing.
Hurricane Freddie broke records. It was the longest tropical storm ever recorded. It lasted 38 days, and it was among the deadliest in the Southern Hemisphere. People like Susan and Charles have contributed virtually nothing to climate change, and yet they're experiencing its wrath. But now, a year later, they've become among the first people anywhere in the world to receive what some experts are referring to as climate compensation.
This money helped me a lot. I am so excited because I will be in a safe place. and I will not have to look over my shoulder in case of any disasters.
I'm so thankful, honestly. I had nothing and no one to turn to.
From the BBC World Service, this is The Climate Question. I'm Greer Jackson, and this is a tale of loss and damage, of justice and money. I'll be following the flow of finance from Scotland to downstream, where it ended up in Malawi, and asking, is it enough? Hello, Ashley. How are you?
Hi, Greer. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. You're back from Malawi. To help me tell this story, I've teamed up with Ashley Lime from BBC Africa. She's been on the ground reporting in Malawi for us, speaking to Charles and Susan. And she remembers the chaos following Cyclone Freddy well.
And we are looking forward to receive, more support from outside to be able to provide, the required life-saving activity.
Malawi is in a state of disaster. And I appeal to the international community to please look at us with such favor because we need help.
I remember hearing about it and even watching it in the news. There's a lot of pain and despair among Malawians because a lot of damage had been done on houses, on roads. I remember even the news reports saying that about 6 months' rain was actually dumped in that country in just 6 days.
I mean, it sounds awful. You went to visit one of the worst hit areas was it about a year later?
That was a year later, and we were going to Nsanje, which is a district in the southern part of Malawi. It's actually an 8-hour drive south from the capital, Lilongwe. We visited Mpatsa Primary School, and I was shocked to actually see a school full of sand. I have never seen sand fill a place like what I saw. So we had more than 10 blocks of classrooms, and sand had actually filled most of them up to the window or even the roof level. And the roofs were pulled off when the flood waters came.
Gosh, I mean, I can't believe how much sand you're describing. It was coming up to the rooftops. I mean, I guess it's eroded off the hills and then washing down into the valleys.
Yes, I particularly remember a signpost showing girls' toilet. And when we looked at it, you couldn't even enter because the sand had actually filled the entire toilet up to the door level, so nobody could actually be able to get in there. There was a lot of destruction, and the school had to be removed, or rather moved from that particular area to an upland area, a vast area also that had makeshift tents and camps where now students are actually learning. And a majority of the students, even in the makeshift camps, were writing on their laps, like they could put their exercise books on their laps and just write from there because they no longer had desks to write on.
The cyclone was so devastating that the whole village had to relocate. They've been living under black plastic sheets ever since. And this is where she met Susan and Charles.
I've just arrived in Kalonga village. It's a vast land with scanty trees. This land was set aside by the government to relocate people displaced by flooding from Cyclone Freddy. The temperatures today are very high at about 32 degrees Celsius. There are also some makeshift houses made of black nylon paper that are still occupied by people.
When we arrived, this whole place was very bushy, very thorny and difficult to live in. We cleared the land and made a house from plastic sheets. The reality of moving from a proper house was difficult. Losing everything and living in a plastic house was very, very hard.
When we got here, it was hard to settle. We had absolutely nothing. Some well-wishers gave me clothes to change into. I had worked so hard, so it was the most painful thing to lose everything all at once.
We did receive the warnings, yes, but we were very reluctant to move. We were like, this is the land of our forefathers. The waters have never washed us away. Little did we know that one day a big flood would come.
We were given early warnings telling us to relocate, but we couldn't. Moving required a lot of money, so we stayed until the flood happened.
I think it's also worth pointing out that before 2015, Malawi had never even seen a cyclone before. There'd never been one.
Yeah, sure, that is really true. But unfortunately, years down the line, in 2022, there was Cyclone Anna, and in 2023, there was Cyclone Freddy. And this has actually been so devastating for these people because the climate shocks were just coming one after the other. And we know that Malawi is actually one of the poorest countries in Africa. So it's actually important that they get funding to be able to move forward and rebuild their lives.
Thank you so much, Ashley. We'll come back to you in a minute to hear what impact this money had on Suzanne and Charles. Now, these funds originally came from the government of Scotland. That's because Scotland and Malawi share more than 100 years of history. Scotland pledged $1.3 million of loss and damage money to the African nation back when it hosted this huge climate conference called COP in Glasgow in 2021. It's the first time this kind of compensatory money has ever been given. The First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney, told me more.
Scotland has always been a country with an international outlook, and we have tried over many years to reflect that in our policy priorities, indeed, particularly with some programme support in Malawi. So we've had a history of looking outwards to recognise our international obligations to help and assist development in other countries.
And for anyone who's not familiar with what loss and damage is, could you just help them understand the importance of it and what it does?
What loss and damage is all about is that it recognises the impact of factors that are out with the control of countries, predominantly in the global south, who have not contributed to the climate emergency in the way that those of us in the developed west have contributed to the climate crisis, to essentially receive support to enable them to withstand some of the consequences of climate change.
Right. I mean, some people call it payback, some people call it climate justice, some people call it compensation, though there is some reluctance to call it that. Politically, it's very hard to spend money elsewhere when there's so much else going on in the world, the cost of living crisis, various wars. I mean, how did your government address that potentially politically difficult challenge?
I think we've managed to do it because of the depth of commitment that there has been to the whole concept of international development in Scotland. And I think what's been striking to me is that that has been broadly supported across the political spectrum. Now, there will, of course, be people here in Scotland that will criticise us for the expenditure that we're making on loss and damage, because they will say, well, we could be spending that money here to tackle the climate emergency. I take a different view. I take a view that I think is consistent with the long-term international moral obligations of Scotland as a responsible international player, that we should, yes, get our own house in order, but we should also support others in facing the challenges that they face.
We'll come back to the First Minister in a bit, because I need to remind everyone that they're listening to The Climate Question from the BBC World Service. I'm Greya Jackson. This week, a story of climate justice, of payback. We're following the money. Scotland sent a little over $1 million to Malawi via a charity called Give Directly. Give Directly matched the funds and then funneled the money to people like Suzanne and Charles, to help them rebuild after the cyclone. Charles and Suzanne, they received around $1,000 in total each, and our reporter, Ashley Lime, spoke to them about what they'd spent the money on.
We were given phones and helped to open mobile money accounts. Then we were given vouchers with details on how we would get the money. So I got 255,000 kwacha first. Then 525,000 kwacha, and finally 4,098,000 kwacha as the last installment.
What do you use the money for?
This money helped me a lot. First, I bought household materials again, since I had lost everything. I also bought clothes and food. With the second installment, I bought sheets of iron and then started making bricks for building, as you can see. The third installment is what I am using to finish this house, buying wood and all that's required so I can complete it. I hope to finish construction work in 10 days.
When we met Susan, she was actually sweeping her compound. Susan is this tall, dark, strong African woman. Like we usually say in Africa, like you have your body energy, like you can still work, you know. So Susan was that kind of a woman. Her house was actually a structure, but not really fully finished because some of the money that she had was spent on food. There was a lot of hunger after Cyclone Freddy hit and the flooding came. So her children were hungry. She was hungry too. She needed to buy clothing. So there were a lot of needs as a result of what they went through. Meaning the more money is required for them to resettle and to build up their lives to what they were in the past.
I must be honest, it was hard, especially for me. I was independent financially and doing very well with my life, but I lost everything and left everything behind to come here. There are also times I wish I could go back, but this money is like a starter pack. I have a new home, a new life. I have plenty of needs, yes, but hey, I have a home, and for that, I am grateful.
You know, there's a lot of value that is attached to ancestral homes when you come to Africa. And that was actually the main reason why she found it really hard to move, leaving your ancestors' graves, because that memory of the graves will actually have been wiped out.
I hadn't ever considered that. That must be such an awful feeling to think you've lost that connection to your ancestors. Obviously, we're talking about things here that are irreplaceable, that can never really be compensated. So there's never going to be a perfect solution. That said, I did wonder whether things could have been done better. Like, why couldn't Charles and Suzanne have had more money? Then they'd been able to finish their new homes and buy back their livestock. It's something I put to the First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney.
There's always a sensitive judgment about the scale of resources that are allocated. I'm pleased to hear that Charles and Suzanne have had the experience of receiving that support. And I think what I want to make sure is that in all the programmes we're taking forward, we are satisfied that they are making a beneficial effect as a consequence. Now, we've been able to increase our funding to address loss and damage to £10 million in total. And it's like all of these different measures that we take forward, there have to be parameters that are put in place. In some circumstances, they may not be sufficiently generous to deal with all of the implications. But what we're trying to do is to make as much of an effect as we can to try to ensure that we support people as far as we can to recover from the damage that they have suffered. And that's one of the recurring challenges that exist within this whole area of policy.
I think one of the other difficulties was that Charles and Suzanne had to wait 6 months before they received the money, so 6 months after the cyclone. And I wonder whether you think it might ever be possible to receive the money just after an event, or perhaps even before the cyclone hits.
We've got to be supportive of getting resources in place as quickly as we possibly can do after particular events. I don't think it'd be possible to do it before cyclone events. I think we'd have to wait to see what the impact would be. But there is another aspect to our loss and damage activity, which is that we've got to be trying to equip areas to withstand challenges arising from the climate. And that's where our resources can be used in a preventative way to try to avoid crises emerging. And I think that's a really important characteristic of the approach that we need to take to the delivery of loss and damage support, that we find ways of acting in a preventative, early intervention way to make sure that the capacity and the capability of areas are strengthened to withstand the challenges that they might face.
Loss and damage, or compensation, is just one type of climate finance officials talk about at these huge climate conferences called COP. Rich, polluting countries have, in the past, pledged money to countries like Malawi to help them to adapt to the effects of a warming world and to fight climate change itself. Those pledges have been pretty problematic, though, as Ashley Lime has been finding out.
I spoke to Dominic Nyasuru, who's the National Youth Network on Climate Change National Coordinator. Dominic told me that Malawians are really frustrated because the money is taking too long to get to people, and therefore there are more climate shocks that are coming as a result of this.
So actually Malawians are really frustrated because the money is getting too long to be accessed. And this is very difficult because the more we delay, the more other shocks are coming, which means that the costs are also increasing. So we need to treat these issues with urgency. My message is that, as a country, loss and damage is a big issue. We have seen a lot of losses, we have seen a lot of damages, and the loss and damages is our priority. Access of these resources are very difficult because of the conditions that are associated with these funds. So definitely we need these funds to come as grants and not loans, which is one of the issues that we are advocating for. As a country, we are much more indebted because of impacts of climate change. So we believe that at the end of the day, we need also these funds to be actually adequate, predictable, but also we need to have a simplified access to this funding that will be discussed during COP29, which is happening in November this year.